Hello, this is Benji Warrior. You're listening to Authentic Warrior Radio. It's a podcast devoted to authenticity, resilience, and communication between diverse and passionate people. Thank you for tuning in.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Warrior. If you would like to support Authentic Warrior Radio, one thing that you can do that would be very simple for you would be to go to Authentic Warrior Radio on iTunes and just leave it a little review and give it some stars. Another thing that you can do, if you would like to support Authentic Warrior Radio, is go to www.patreon.com/Authentic Warrior Radio. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this promotional effort on behalf of Authentic Warrior Radio.
All right, time to get this episode out. I've been procrastinating for a while now. This episode is with Dave Porter. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, a Marine, and a pole dancer, a card trickster, a generally awesome dude who is the personification of conviction or the epitome of conviction, or I don't know, but it's true. It's definitely true. This episode was really intense for me. I already woke up the morning that we had this conversation ready to deal with some shit that I hadn't been ready to deal with in a long time. So when Dave was on his way over, I was already thinking to myself, keep it together, dude. Don't let this be a shit show. And I don't know why I thought that having like several 6-packs of beer was going to make that easier for me. But if I could redo anything about this episode, it would be I would keep my fucking mouth shut. Not the whole time, but there was definitely some times where I was just being an idiot. The 24 hours that followed this conversation, I'm not going to say this conversation is the reason why I sort of unraveled afterwards. I was already prepared to do that. But this conversation was so intense and it stirred up so much for me that the 24 hours that followed were extremely intense. Did a lot of grief processing and unpacking of some traumatic memories of mine. Got on the phone with some good friends and some people in my family who I haven't talked to in a long time. And the next day, like on the 24th hour to a T, I started drinking water, went and ran stairs, did jiu-jitsu, and I quit caffeine and alcohol that day. I actually haven't produced an episode since all that happened. It was a game changer, that day was. And this conversation, I don't know if it's going to have the same effect on other listeners as it did on me. Honestly, you're probably going to listen to it and your experience will be completely different from mine. I have layers, you know, and those layers are alternately stacked. And so you've got like layers of trash and layers of treasure. And I really needed to unstack all those layers and see the worst of myself and the best of myself. And I didn't see the best that day because that day was dedicated to the trash, taking the trash out. And this conversation like alludes to things like setting down your baggage and sorting it all out. And that happened for me. That's what I did. So enjoy Dave being freaking awesome and me being obnoxious and drunk, and hopefully whatever, I'm gonna stop talking. I guess I can't blame all my stupid things that I say on alcohol because I'm sober right now and foot in mouth, even when I'm just sitting here by myself talking into a microphone. All right, well, I guess on that note, oh yeah, I guess I should probably do my Patreon shout out to Molly the Cop, Megan, my sister, Matt Hagum, Mike Rowe, and Chris Cook. I got 5 of you now. It's wonderful. And I know I've been not producing as many episodes lately. My life has been pretty action-packed, but I promise you that I have been focusing on the podcast in other ways and improving my ability to produce quality stuff, and that from here on out it's only going to continue to get better. If you listen to episode 1 or like just the first like 5 episodes and then you listen to some of the more recent ones, like other than the pod hogging that I do sometimes, I think I've improved in a lot of different areas. And I've also, dude, the last like several months have been pretty intense, like in general. Like the day that I recorded this was kind of like the culmination of like several months of shit that I've been kind of dredging up and slogging through. What does slogging mean? Is that like slogging, like walking through a swamp, slogging? Or is that trudging? Because I know I was dredging and I was trudging and I was slogging. Can I just say, like, dude, for the last like 8 months or something, like, I've been a shitbird. Like, I've been shitbirding through life. And I haven't even been doing a good job of it. Most of my life, I've had basically 2 settings, off and on. And when I'm on, I'm going 100%. And when I'm off, I'm not. And sometimes I experiment with moderation. And what that looks like is I'm moderate in ways that are not always positive. Like, I feel like moderation is a double-edged sword because the shitty side of moderation is half-assing. And so I'm going to go back to my old way of full force, no half-ass, no shitbirding. And the whole like alcohol thing, in the last like 8 months, like it very subtly became a habit and a coping mechanism that was maladaptive and not helpful. And so I did a hard reset, and I have absolutely no fucking desire to drink right now. So hopefully you'll hear me slurring my words less, but I have to say, after hours and hours and hours of sitting and listening to myself and other people talk while editing episodes, I slur my words a lot even when I'm sober, because brain trauma from not just in the ring, but just all kinds of other shit from the past. Any hoosers. And now I'm just like rambling and shit. You like that? You guys like it when I ramble? If you do, let me know. If you don't, let me know. You can just go to authenticwarrior.org and go down to the bottom, the footer of my website, and there's like all kinds of ways to contact me. If you ever have any feedback to give me, or constructive criticism or destructive criticism, whatever the fuck, if you have any feedback, feel free to let me know. Okay, is there anything else I wanted to say? I want to say that if you want to avoid sounding like me, having all these sort of stutters and long pauses between the things you say and tripping over yourself and like making all these fucked up sentences and then starting over halfway through the sentence all the time, shit like that, there's 2 things I can recommend to you. One is, well, if you longboard, wear a helmet. If you do martial arts, definitely use proper protective equipment. Go to Cage Side Fight Co. or just, cageside.com and buy shit for protecting yourself, like gloves and pads and headgear and mouth guards. Go to supplementsmarter.com and use the promo code Warrior and get yourself some genius mushroom supplements for your brain. It'll make your brain head work better. Gotta have brain head power for the brain head damage mitigation. Okay, I'm letting you go. I just love talking your fucking ear off. Okay, I'm done. 3, 2, 1, here's Dave. All right, I'm excited as fuck. I got Dave Porter, one of my new friends from the gym, from BMMA. Like, met you like 6 months ago or some shit.
Yeah, a little bit more than that. I came out in August, was just visiting the area then, and now I freaking live here. I get mail here.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking cool. And I don't know, like, your whole fucking story, but I know, like, what I do know about you is, like, relatable. Like, a lot of people make comments about how I've lived a really fucking eventful, like, life. Like, seen and done a lot of shit, and I got stories for days that are crazy as fuck, and I don't know anything about you other than, like, you're a jiu-jitsu black belt, you're from the Bronx, and you are a legit b-boy and you're a Marine, and like
weird spread.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah,
and can I mention pole dancing?
Of course. Yeah, so that was a fun time altogether. But I was married for about 5.5 years, and my ex was into pole fitness, and for me it was like I was like, man, should I be worried? I'm a Marine. Is my wife going to be a stripper?
Yeah.
So I got kind of invested into finding out more about this.
Like when you're like on deployment, you're afraid of like.
No, I wasn't deployed yet. But when I had first gotten into the service, I went out to California from the East Coast, and I got stationed out there for a little bit. And that's when she hits me with this. I think I'm gonna try this place called Diva Fit. I was like, okay, Diva Fit sounds kind of weird, but at least fitness is in the name. What's it about? She's like, oh, it's pole dancing. Wait a minute. Like there's too many variables. Like if I'm an active duty Marine and my wife was pole dancing, that has to mean she's a stripper, right? But it wasn't. It turns out it really is.
Wait,
just
I don't understand.
fitness.
Why does your being a Marine make her a stripper?
Oh, Marines and strippers go together like peanut butter and jelly. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who will listen to this, if you were active duty military, you have that one friend and you know they were dating or married to a stripper. So for me, going in, I was like, crap, is that going to be me? And then I did some more research and found out that wasn't the case. She really was just into the fitness. And then she eventually gets to a point where she's training at this other place that wasn't Diva Fit, that was co-ed. And so I got into it with her. And because I had been, street dancing, pole dancing was just like, okay, how can I find a way to incorporate a prop into my dance? So I was still doing like Indian step and 6-step movements with a freaking pole.
That's what I used to have one right here in my living room. Like right where you're sitting, I used to have one because I was like, I got to learn how to break dance on multiple axes.
Yeah. And that's what it was for me. And like there's a video of me walking upside down on the ceiling. And then there's videos of me doing what would be like a Thomas flare, or what we consider like flaring. And they just have a different name for it. But I am a beginner at that level of stuff, coming in doing what they consider expert level moves, because they're like, well, shit, grabbing one hand and throwing yourself and flaring your legs and catching yourself behind the pole with your other hand is a really high level maneuver. I'm like, well, shit, that's like year one b-boying. Anybody knows how to backspin. Like, now I'm just doing this. So I got into that by accident. But man, I feel you on that front of people come up to me and they're like, wait a minute, you're all those things? Yeah, what do you do on Saturday night?
Or just like you don't make sense to me because you don't fit a stereotype across, like there's too many stereotypes smashing together right now.
Why can't I have all of it? Like, right? I'm just saying, I play Magic the Gathering, I'm a big fucking nerd. I take a lot of my downtime and I try new things. So my most recent relationship had me doing rock climbing, and I got big into rock climbing for a bit. And nothing crazy, but I did do some outdoor like 70-foot walls. I did a lot of bouldering, and when I put those videos online, people are like, oh my God, you're really good at that. I'm like, no, actually I'm not. But to somebody who's never done it before, it looks like I might be doing something crazy, but I'm like, it's jiu-jitsu on a wall. I'm learning where to put my body weight, how my grips come into play, how much of my physicality not to put into it, because you're not just death clamping onto every little crimping hold, right? Yeah. If anything, it's like your feet get you up the wall, your hands hold you to the wall. So people think you're just doing like 40 one-armed pull-ups. That ain't it, because I can't do one-armed pull-up. But when you see it, that's what it looks like, because they just don't know. So they're like, wait a minute, you pole dance, you rock climb, you b-boy, you do jiu-jitsu, you fought MMA, you fought Muay Thai, you travel, you do this, you do that, you play friggin' Magic, you play video games, you do that. Yes, there's 24 hours in a day. And I have insomnia, so realistically, I get about 20 of those hours a day. Yeah. So man, there's a lot of shit you can do in 20 hours. And I fucking do card tricks.
Dude, Me and you have so much in common.
Good.
I feel like you're speaking from my heart right now.
Good.
So you do card tricks, okay? Like, what else?
Well, let me explain the card tricks for a second,
Okay.
because some people are like, well, that makes no sense. The same way that you said before, that doesn't fit into a nice compartment of what makes you. Mm-hmm. Well, when you see my hands are friggin' destroyed, right? Like they just look like mangled messes, and I'm not a mechanic. Mm-hmm. But my hands get jammed up doing punches. My hands get jammed up gripping, and then someone breaking a grip violently. Well, we're so used to in combat sports making a fist, right? Mm-hmm. So that's me taking all of my fingers to a center point, and you're flexing that constantly, and you're doing it over and over and over. But we forget. It's like when you go to a gym, if you want to work your bicep, you should work your tricep. You work your chest, you should work your back. How many times do we work the back of our hand?
Right.
So there are very few activities that force you to pull your fingers back. Mm-hmm. So if you were playing on a keyboard, right, you're pulling your fingers back constantly. Mm-hmm. So concert pianists have the opposite problem. Mm-hmm. They are always bringing their fingers back. They should do exercises to bring their fingers forward. I got into doing card tricks because all the shuffling and breaking mechanics of that really worked the back of my hands and started to fight back against what would eventually have been like carpal tunnel.
Yeah.
And a lot of fighters get that. Growing up with traditional martial arts like karate and kung fu, you would see like these old men who would do like hard qigong, iron body training, and their hands would be like, flippers.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't open their hands anymore. And you know it because you've seen it. Mm-hmm. If those guys had access to the knowledge of the human body that we do now in 2019, they would have exercises to open their hands up more. Mm-hmm. So yes, you can still clench and make a really tight fist for striking, or you can grapple and not worry about a grip break, and you're constantly flexing that, but you're evening out the musculature. Mm-hmm. The back of your hands will also be strong. So now when it's time for me to open my hand up, I can. So I got into card tricks because the different cuts, breaks, and shuffles allowed me to have something that wasn't as tedious as using like those rubber bands where you just put them around your fingers and open. Like that would be boring to me. Mm-hmm. Whereas I can sit, and even if I'm failing 1,000 times at a card trick, it's fun, right? Mm-hmm. So at least doing that was helping my hands not become crippled little mittens while ultimately, busying myself up. So it was fun. And that's how I got into a lot of stupid shit. It's like you do it because you don't want to be bored doing something, but you need to service something, whether it's like just keeping your mind busy, busying your body, or busying the soul, right? That's really all it comes down to.
How'd you learn that?
So I went to school for dietary sciences. And when I went to school, I thought I was going to be like a nutritionist, right? Mm-hmm. As I sit here drinking beer. But
dude, I am beer fueled. I am the most, right now I just feel like the most fraudulent fucking fitness guru on the planet.
You're not. I mean,
I work out like 2 to 4 hours a day and drink beer and don't eat food. And like,
so on Saturday I had 9 lemon-filled donuts. Like you're preaching to the choir. But here's the difference, right? It's not like I'm doing those donuts every day. And it's not like you're drinking a 24 pack a day. It's not like, that's it. There's fitness in there. There's recovery. There's downtime. The difference between someone who's going to only eat donuts all day versus someone like me who, yes, I am going to binge on some donuts today. Mm-hmm. But the other 6 days out of the week, man, it's like I had my steel cut oats for breakfast. I had some other good stuff. Like I had, like right as I was leaving after I took my shower before coming here, it's like I had a whole grain bagel with some unsalted butter and some oranges. And it's like, cool, I got a little bit of enough stuff to keep me going just so that I can make it to dinner tonight. Mm. Along the way, I will have some beer, enjoy myself, because life, not to drop some wisdom, but it's like, I fucking hate YOLO, right? Yeah. YOLO is the dumbest shit I ever heard in my life. It's not you only live once. You only die once. You live every day.
Yeah.
Right? So we should be living. Enjoy your fucking self. You know what? If I don't have this beer today, I could still die tomorrow. Why not enjoy myself? So I'm a big fanatic of
Yodo.
You only die once, right? But I'm a big fanatic of enjoy yourself today, but not to excess, right? Like, I'm not going to be unable to drive home. I'm not going to be fall down like stupid freaking drunk. But I am going to enjoy myself if I'm in company. I think where we can have a problem is you're drinking to excess and you're alone. Now you have a problem.
Dude.
Now you have a problem, right?
But that's, yeah.
But if you know it's a problem, at least recognizing it as the first step, right? And then you could start to tone it down and figure out some other shit.
It's a problem in like chapters, like, of my life.
Okay, well, still, that's the best thing about chapters. That's not the whole book.
Yeah.
So you could take your time and you can come back and rewrite the next one.
Yeah.
So for me, you can be into fitness, you can be into dietary sciences, you can be into nutrition, whatever, and still break some of the rules. I do it in jiu-jitsu all the time. It's like, I know enough of the rules to learn how to break them and when. And then people are like, but see, you did that. Cool, I did that one time.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I got stupid drunk a few weeks ago.
But you're a Marine.
Yeah.
How many times have you been stupid drunk?
A lot.
And how much has your beer consumption gone up since you moved to Bellingham?
Actually, not as much as you would think. So here's the thing. If I were an active duty Marine and I lived here, I would not be alive today. Because I would be somewhere dead. Like, I could see myself getting stupid drunk and doing something stupid. But I definitely drank more when I was in the service, and then when I got out, I also intensified my jiu-jitsu training, and I just didn't have time to drink the way I was. So the good news was I had such crazy high goals in that I couldn't go off the path set by myself, and that kept me in check. I move here, and although I'm not actively competing anymore, my last competition was in December, and now I'm retired from competition.
Oh shit.
Yeah. So I'm putting 100% of my time into you and everybody else at the gym because that's the new chapter in my life, Dave the instructor versus Dave the competitor. But even with that, I have my commitments during the day and during the evening to you guys. So I need to at least be professional enough during those times to show up and give you 100% of everything I have in my being. The second it's Friday night at 9:30, don't come to me with jiu-jitsu. I'm too busy going to one of the 14 breweries in Bellingham.
Yeah.
Right? And that's another thing about Bellingham. 14 breweries and they're all thriving.
That's why I'm asking you how much your drinking has gone up.
But it's only on the weekends. So for the most part, if it's like a late lunch or an early dinner and training is done for the day, like today, I did my midday class. I'm not going back in the evening.
Dude, I'm sorry. The worst thing ever to not silence your phone when you have somebody recording a podcast with you.
But the good news is it's me, so I'm cool with it.
Dude, I really want to know, like, basically, it sounds like what you were telling me before with, like, the card tricks and all that. Like, is that idle hands are the devil's plaything? And I want to know how you learned that.
Yeah, I mean, so now we start getting into a more obscure time in my life when I didn't have as many activities, right? So I've had insomnia since I was an infant. The earliest stories my mother told me was I wasn't even 2 years old yet, and she enrolled me in a sleep study at Stony Brook University in New York. Do you know how little you have to sleep as an infant for your parent to get worried and take you to a freaking sleep study? I mean, it was something like 2 hours a day. That was it. And it's been that way my whole life. I am physically resistant to melatonin, and I mean, you couldn't possibly name a holistic or herbal remedy that I haven't tried. So there is no degree of sleepy time tea or marijuana on the planet that can mellow me out enough to shut off my mind.
I'm right there with you, dude.
And it's the absolute other way. If you try to use some kind of sedative or something like that, it's like the volume in my head goes up.
Yeah. Drinking beer, like, gives me, like, it wires me. It's weird.
And it's weird. For people like us, things that would normally slow us down are only slowing us down physically. Mm-hmm. Mentally, it's turning us up. Right? And like, that's the problem.
Fucking using meditation and like breathing stuff to try to go to sleep, dude, my brain just races. Like I become more present and clear and like I can't, no, dude.
So what I noticed was it really has to do with sensory input, right? So even if I limit myself by saying, all right, 10 p.m., all lights off, phone powered down until the morning. No way of even enticing myself to look at something. I'm just going to shut my eyes and try this. My mind will start racing, right? So what I realized was you have to find the ways of taking it down in stages. It's almost like I have to exhaust my mind first. So some people do it the exact opposite and they love working out at night. And it's like, I'm going to go to the gym and lift for an hour and then I'll be so tired, I'll go home. It's like, no, because now my body has worked and now I'm going to be in this like almost catatonic state physically with my mind racing. So what I started to do was, it's like Sudoku, crosswords, all different types of puzzles. Like I would do those games at night, like little brain teasers, and I would play whatever strategy-based game until it's like you get to that level of frustration and then turn it off and power down. And it's like, cool, I've exhausted my mind. I worked out my brain. Now I can actually get 5 to 6 hours of sleep. And it would be like that for years. And I learned that trick in my early 20s when I was still in college. When I went into the military, it's a little different, right? Because not only do you not get to sleep when you want to, you sleep when they tell you to, but you might have to wake up in the middle of the night and then watch everybody else who's sleeping. Now, ain't that a kick in the nuts? It's like, look at that dude who's freaking asleep. I wish I could be that guy.
Yeah.
And so you kind of get into this state of being pissed off. And now they're like, cool, now your shift's over, now go to sleep. How the hell am I going to go to sleep? I'm pissed off. I just got done watching everybody sleep. So my insomnia came back like tenfold when I was in the service, and I learned to just operate on like 4 hours a night, and it was miserable. When I got out, I went back to trying all the ways of exhausting my mind, and the strategy games and all that stuff, they helped, but they weren't as effective as they were earlier. And I realized it's because my brain is different. Now I'm conditioned to be alert at night and think about all these other people. And I realized, like, as I was in this relationship, it's like, I don't know why, but I'm worried about whether that person's okay. And there's no reason. That person is asleep sound. I should be asleep sound. But I couldn't be, because I was just wired to think about the people to the left and right of me. And even though there wasn't another girl to the left of me, well, whatever.
There could have been.
That sounds like more trouble.
Sounds like worth it. Trouble that's worth it.
You know.
But then again, I mean, I'm
different.
I'm the one with all the fucking stories.
I'm just saying, like, I can't tell that story right now. But man, it was a different time in my life when I was going through that. But I thought to myself, how do I deal with not being able to sleep? And then I realized you just have to find a way to remind yourself and train yourself, like, that's what you have to be doing right now. So just like you have to train yourself to throw a crisp jab and not cross your feet, you have to also find a way to train yourself into saying, this is how I have to go to sleep. It's a part of your training. So once I conditioned my mind into saying, this isn't something I want, this is something I need, I found out that I'm an objective-based motherfucker. You give me an objective, and I am like the avatar of conviction.
And you only have one setting, and that's like do or do not.
Correct.
Right? Like I can tell that, and I can relate to that. That's how.
Yeah. Doing something half-assed isn't the way of doing anything, right? So it's like I don't want to sit down and play a video game in a competitive manner if I've never touched the game before. Because if I come into a room and you guys are playing, like, name freaking game X, right? Whatever it is, and if I've never played it, I'm not going to sit down with you guys because I'm going to make myself look like a fool. And that is like one of my biggest fears is like, I'm going to suck badly at something.
So you learn the shit on your own and then you show up and fucking...
Correct. Because for me...
Take souls.
Yeah. And for me, it's a matter of, I don't want to look bad doing something. And it's just like, well, I had to learn to tell myself like, you need sleep. If you don't sleep, you're just going to look like ass the whole next day. So it became that thing where it's like, cool, Dave, you need to power down because you need to do this, not because you want to. And once I told myself like this was an objective, I did it. And I am like and I say this often, I am like the living embodiment of conviction. So if you told me run through that wall, I'm going to run through that freaking wall. Like I am going to make it happen. And probably the most relatable character in fiction is John Wick. Like I loved in John Wick 2 when they were like, but he's just a man. It's like, no. He's a man with more willpower than any living man should have. He's going to do things just because he desires it so badly that you shooting him is not going to stop him necessarily unless you catch him in the head, right? You need to absolutely take him out because he's not out until he's really out.
That's how my friends used to describe me back in the day. Because I used to like fucking... If I had a belief, and somebody threatened, I don't know. It was not even just an ego thing. It was like, I don't know. I would go places with my friends, and for some reason, so I'm like people size me up as like, I think like an easy enough target that they might be able to succeed at kicking my ass, but intimidated. No, like I'm intimidating enough to be impressive. Like if they kick my ass.
So it's like, it's almost a feather in their hat if they could, but they're still on the fence of whether they should.
Like what happens is like, it still happens to this day. And I don't really go out to a lot of bars because of this, but like in every bar, there's a group of douchebags. And that group of douchebags has one extreme douchebag who like is looking for someone like me, who like is intimidating enough to be like, super fucking impressive to kick my ass. They'd impress their buddies by kicking my ass, but like I'm short, like I'm 190 pounds and 5'8", and like it's like I might be able to kick that guy's ass and it would look really good if I did. So they pick me out of the fucking crowd, and then they always got their other douchebag friends. So like even if I start to kick their ass, their friends will jump in. But like. Back in the day when I was younger, like I partied a lot more than I do now, and like I would find myself in some pretty fucking crazy situations, but like when somebody would say would like disrespect one of my friends or something, like I was the guardian of like all my friends. Like I was the guy who like I got expelled 4 times in 8th grade, like kicked out of the school district for sticking up for people, and like so I would always end up in a fight. Like even if I didn't, sometimes I started it, sometimes I didn't.
You're really speaking to my soul right now, because in 7th grade, my assistant principal, 3rd week of school, calls me into the office after I just gotten into a school fight, and she said, I could tell this year was going to be bad because she was the vice principal when I was in the elementary school and then became the vice principal of the middle school. So she had followed me around for the last 4 years. And she goes, I am now to the point in my career where I have figured out if I know a student by name, it's either because they're doing something exceptionally good or exceptionally bad. Guess which one you are, David? And now,
both.
And now I'm going to tell you that I can gauge how my year is going to be in terms of bad paperwork based on how early in the school year I see you in my office. So now this was week 3 of my 7th grade year.
And he's from South Bronx.
At this point, I had moved away from the city proper, but I was still in New York. I was on Long Island, but this administrator was like, this is going to be a bad freaking year, right? She's like, this is going to be a bad year because this is week 3 and I'm seeing you now. Sure enough, that was the year that I spent more days in school suspension than in my classrooms. And I equate it to your story in the sense of on the days or weeks when I didn't want to fight, I would still fight. Mm-hmm. And on the days when I didn't want to fight, I would fight multiple times. Mm-hmm. So Nowadays, when people see me on the internet in any of my MMA fights, my jiu-jitsu matches, they always go, "Man, you're so calm when you're doing this."
You're fucking such a smart ass, dude. You have perfected the art of smartassery.
Oh yeah, well that's the thing too.
You fucking pull out your lapels and hand them to Daniel Frank.
Yeah, well Daniel is a good buddy of mine, and we've had 9 matches to this day, and so like in the very early stages, a lot less of that. In the much later stages, I'm just so used to his game. So there's a little bit of learning curve there. But in a different respect, you're absolutely correct. When I figure out a thing, and it could be something like grappling, right? When I figure out a thing, I can then just go through with whatever it is, and it doesn't matter. Like, you might see it as showing this hand, but it's really this hand you got to watch out for. But going back to what I was saying before, it's like, I can look super calm in those matches because that's only jiu-jitsu. I have had so many interactions where it's like, I've been stabbed twice. I've been shot at multiple times when I was in the service. This is only grappling. There's not even strikes. Why should I be nervous? Yeah. I've been in so many fights in school. Like, I remember, I can actually lift up my shirt and show you a piece of graphite that's still in my back. I had a guy like dig a pencil into my back in a fight. And it's like, man, there's no weapons. There's no potential for another guy to jump in the middle of my fight. And I've been jumped so many times in my life. And my nose was broken at least, I want to say it was like 8 times by the time I was through middle school and 5 more times in high school. So by the time I even became a professional fighter at 18, but even by the time I was 18, my nose had been broken over 12 times. And it's like, dude, think about what an 18-year-old is to us now. We look at them, we're like, oh, that's a kid, right? 18 is a legal adult, but that's a freaking kid. No kid should have their nose broken 12 times.
But you're a white kid in South Bronx, dude.
Yeah, I mean, that's a thing, and racism exists on both sides, definitely one more than the other, but in that respect, you're very isolated. I had so much more respect for combat arts because it's like there's finite rules, it's one-on-one, and rules do protect you, right? So even if it's Muay Thai, it's like, fuck man, they can elbow you in the face, absolutely, but it's still only one person, and they can only do it in this particular direction, and they can only do it here in your face, right? So it's like there's so many things protecting you. Man, I got one of the worst ass kickings of my life when I was in 9th grade because I got jumped by 5 guys. And I don't care who you are. You could be the toughest 15-year-old in the world. But when you're getting curb stomped by 10 Timberlands.
Dude, look at this. You see this fucking... This is from Curb Stomp.
Yeah.
Like, I can relate to what you're saying.
It's fucked up. And so when it came time for me to get into combat sports, it was like a vacation. Wait, you mean that guy's drug tested? You mean that guy is tested for communicable diseases? And you mean he's going to wear gloves? And there's only one of them. Why should I be worried? I mean, yeah, train and be a professional and do it the right way, but that is not scary to me. There are some people that have no desire to get into a cage or a ring because they're like, oh, that's so scary. It's like, cool. I am glad that your life was so comfortable that is scary to you. Yeah. Now let me tell you how scary it can be on the mythical streets where no fights ever exist. Spoiler alert, they happen all the time in the wrong places. So when I encounter a student who I happen to know is in a bad area where they might be more of a victim than, say, Timothy Smith, who's on the right side of the tracks, that guy probably doesn't need jiu-jitsu. But now child Y or X, who has the unfortunate circumstance of being in the wrong part of the zip code and has a smaller frame, man, that's the person who needs self-defense. That's the person who should be training themselves and being ready because they're going to be the target. Like you said, you're at that perfect body type to where somebody else who thinks that they're a tough guy knows you're enough of a challenge, but you're not 6'6" Michael Clark Duncan. Yeah. Right? He doesn't look at that guy and go, yep, that's the guy. They're going to look at you and be like, okay, I have a 50-50 chance that I beat this guy's ass or he beats me, but at least I'll take that. Whereas they look at 6'6" dude and they're like, I have a 5% chance of beating that guy. I'm going to mind my business. Now, someone much smaller, they're going to be like, yep, now that's just a pure victim. That's not a feather in their cap. That's just someone that they're going to go after. Mm-hmm. So when I'm talking to some of my students who are female and younger, and I have to talk about, sexual assaults and victim mindset, like they need to pretend before a circumstance happens. What is the worst thing that could happen? What is the worst thing? You go to this party. What is the absolute worst thing that can happen? You get isolated. Because when you're isolated, you don't know your surroundings, bam, bad things happen. I'm a big proponent of preparing for the worst in terms of physical confrontation. I'm not a doomsday prepper. I don't think like a nuke is going to hit us, but I'm constantly thinking about a physical threat. That is one thing that is more realistic. Mm-hmm. So rather than building a bunker in my backyard, I'm training my body and I'm always keeping my head on a swivel. When I tell women something like 80% of women who are attacked from behind, and most of them have ponytails or long hair, because the first thing that the assailant does, grab them by the hair, pull them off posture. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but have you ever trained any stand-up mechanic with your head going over your heels? Because I know I haven't. And it's one of those things where you're the most vulnerable and the least amount of your technique will work in that situation. The other thing is looking into a purse or a bag or looking at your phone. You're not looking at your sectors. If your head is down and you're looking down, you're not going to notice someone sneaking up on you. And then if you happen to have long hair, braided or in a bun or something that is easily grabbable, that's the next thing that they're going after. So when I'm telling my students stuff like, specifically like how to wear your hair should not be a form of self-defense, but it really is. And then something like, okay, how many times have you walked in a parking lot between the cars? I do it all the time. I still do it. But when I'm doing it, I am not fondling a phone or handling something. I am alert and I'm looking around. I tell women, don't walk between cars ever. There's too many blind spots. Walk down the lanes until you get to your car. Mm-hmm. If you're walking in between something and you don't know what's between those cars, you're going in blind. Now, I break my own rule, but I am trained in how to deal with certain circumstances that they're not. So it's more about building that awareness than anything else. And that's what I had to learn as a little kid. It's like, man, there were certain ways I knew if I took home, I was gonna get into a fight. And then there were certain ways that if I took were less likely to get me into a fight. Mm-hmm. You know, you're walking somewhere where there's actual sidewalks and traffic regularly, people are not inclined to get into a physical altercation where someone can pull over and come in, right? Even if nobody does because it's New York. It's still less likely because the mindset is there. But if I cut through an alleyway, there's no flow of traffic, there's nobody, you're probably going to get into a fight. So something as stupid as just having that awareness, having your head on a swivel, looking left and right constantly, and not being distracted, those are things that will limit your potential for being a victim. If you go to a party and you're in a place that is not your place, don't go into any rooms alone. That's it, right? And if you're the host of the party, don't allow anybody to follow you into any room that has a door that can close behind you. It's something simple like that. That will prevent a lot of tragedy. But what happens all the time? We get so comfortable in our day-to-day because it never happened before that when it happens, we're like, how did this happen? Oh my God, I can't believe this happened. It's like, yes, I can absolutely believe this happened. And the other thing is always have a plan of where you're gonna sleep. Mm-hmm. So right now, if I were to get so smashed that I couldn't drive home, I would still know where I'm sleeping.
Well, you know, I would always give you a place to stay.
Yeah, but that's my thing. Like, I'm not gonna put myself in a position where I don't know where I'm going to put myself in my most vulnerable state, mm-hmm. right? And when you think about it, what is your most vulnerable state? When you're sleeping.
Yeah.
So I've unfortunately had to deal with so many after effects of this with people in my life, where it's like some tragedy befell somebody I knew, and the script might be a little different, but the main plot line was still the same, the whole build up towards that incident. Mm-hmm. And if you just reverse engineer it, you can come back to the general idea of it's going to be someone that you're more knowledgeable of. Mm-hmm. It's usually not a complete stranger, more times out of the majority.
It's like with it's like with women who've been or assaulted or children or whatever. It's like
someone they know,
someone in the family,
usually
like a close family friend or some shit.
Usually, and these people that are ambush predators, right? You'd be surprised at how many times they are not a physically intimidating person, right? It's usually the opposite.
Because those are the people you let your guard down around.
Exactly, and that once again comes back to the idea of don't be distracted and don't think for a second that safety is a permanent state of affairs, because it's not, right? This is why, when I think back to even just a week ago here in Bellingham, there was a tragedy. A guy who was on a bicycle got hit by the train, right? And that was near where we train. And it screwed up traffic. The train was messed up for a while because they had to stop. And it's like, how did this all happen? It's not because this guy was drugged out of his mind and decided to race a train. It's just bad judgment and people that do things every day the same way, and they get used to this idea of safety. Mm-hmm. Guy was doing his normal route, was turning a corner, and boom, next thing you know, he falls onto the tracks and a train was coming. Yeah. And he gets hit by a train. It's like, if you're coming down this hill every day at 20 miles an hour and you're never used to using your brakes or going safely, when you absolutely need to use it, will it be there? Are your brakes going to save your life? I hear all the time, it's like, oh man, I don't need self-defense, I carry a gun. Cool. Have you pulled it and drawn it on somebody and shot yet?
Yeah.
Have you built up that ability to do it on command? Because otherwise, that might be used against you. I know lots of people that carry knives and have never stabbed somebody.
Fuck, dude. If somebody pulled a gun on me in close range, I would probably shoot them with that gun while it's still in their own hand.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a part of it, right? Like, we learn all the time how we can attack people.
It's like women carrying a knife. Like, it drives me crazy when I'm like, you're going to walk home alone right now in the dark? And they're like, it's okay, I carry a knife. Like, dude, the last thing that you should bring into a confrontation when you don't have the strength that the other person has or any fucking training whatsoever is a blade. Like, that's the worst fucking shit to do.
I had, and I'm not going to name names because it's embarrassing, but I had a acquaintance of mine who said they carried bear spray. Mm-hmm. And it's like, great. You understand that in a situation where you would use that, you would use it from like 20 to 30 feet away because that's the power of the blast.
Yeah, and it's
now I want you to put yourself in a raincoat with a face shield and spray it 1 foot in front of you and tell me it doesn't get around your face shield and into your own eyes.
Yeah.
You don't even know the strength of your own tool. You're going to use this bear spray at point blank range and you're going to spray yourself too. And now you have somebody who had already amped themselves up to commit a violent act and you've pissed them off. What do you think's going to happen to you? You're the scared victim and you just sprayed yourself too. You think you're going to fight harder than that person now? It's not going to happen. It's that sense of awareness and knowledge of your skill set.
Most people have no clue about self-defense, dude.
No.
It's crazy. Like, I went running I woke up fucking drunk. And then I went running and I ran a bunch of sets of stairs like while I was still drunk. And I was like, I'm going to hurt myself right now. But I finished what I set out to do. And I was like feeling like shit about myself. And then I realized like, oh my God, like I'm not a normal person. Like, who the fuck does this?
Military personnel every day.
Right? But like, still not a normal person.
No, not a normal person by any stretch of the imagination. But this is the thing that people sometimes fail to forget. I saw a video yesterday and it was hilarious and I can explain it. There was a long stretch of flat road and a car is driving next to this truck and the operator of this truck is clearly on crack. Mm-hmm. He's in his vehicle and he sets it to whatever speed and then proceeds to climb out of his driver's side window while only holding on to his door, and he's fake sprinting in his moving vehicle. That's clearly doing like over 40. And the title of this says, regardless of how you feel about crackheads, you have to admire how incredible they are sometimes. And you think about this. Think about this. That guy is clearly on some kind of drug, right? Yeah. Most likely, he's a crack addict. Yeah. And he's doing this thing, and he does not die. Now, when I think about that as like an extreme example, and then I think about like when I was in the military, and drinking was just like a part of life, and we're all like at the sub-alcoholic levels of how we go about our day-to-day lives. And then I would go for like a physical fitness test. The best physical fitness test I ever ran in my life, I was hung over to the highest degree. And you would think, oh, you're dehydrated. How did you do your 3-mile run in 19 minutes?
Fucking conviction, for one.
Well, I mean, that's part of it. But the other thing is, you're still so numb from your hangover that your level of fucks to give is in the negatives, right? So whereas a normal person with no inebriation is like, fuck this. I don't know if I want to pump my legs this fast. A person who is coming off from being drunk is so miserable. They know that the only way this ends is if they get it done quicker.
Yeah.
And because you're at this weird level of, man, this sucks, but also with that background noise of, man, I don't feel too good, but I also don't realize how good I don't feel, you're going to pump your legs faster. So it's weird how the best run I ever did was when I was at my worst. And then when you think about it, boil it down into a different respect. We hear these stories about like some old lady lifting a car to save like her grandkid or whatever. And it's like, yes, you could chalk that up to adrenaline, but realistically, the human body is capable of so many things. You just have to cancel out your doubt. Mm-hmm. If you can John Wick the crap out of something every day, you would just be incredible. So when I see people doing things that I would normally say, man, there's no way that person should have been able to do that, I remind myself that they probably have no doubt in their mind that they could have done it. So did you see the Netflix, not Netflix, sorry, the documentary on Alex Honnold?
One of those? No.
Alex Honnold did the movie Free Solo, where he climbed the face of El Capitan in Yosemite Park without a rope.
Oh, shit.
It's over 3,000 feet. I don't know about you, but I'm not climbing anything over 10 feet without safety.
One time I climbed something that was like 30 feet, and I still look back on that and think there's no excuse for that level of retardation.
Correct. Now, going back to my 30th... I shouldn't use that
word, I'm sorry.
You're fine. You didn't hurt my feelings. But especially when you're not using it in a derogatory sense against the handicapped, you meant it in the sense of, man, I should not have done that. I was not of sound mind.
Well, and it also has like a different definition every like 10 years.
Of course it does. But when I think back to my 30th birthday, I scaled a brick building, breaking into the second level of this building just so that I can open it up from the inside so that I could train jiu-jitsu.
That was your 30th birthday?
When I was drunk as fuck. No person in their right mind would have scaled the side of a brick building to the second level and try to sneak in through a sliver of a window.
I did that when I was 19.
Yeah, nobody would do that unless they were out of their freaking mind. And why did I think I could do that? Because I was drunk and I had no fear.
I was sober. What's my excuse?
You don't, but that's okay.
I didn't like my life very much, so I was okay with it.
But that in and of itself cancels out some degree of fear. So during the movie Free Solo, they talk about this guy, Alex Honnold, and they did an MRI of his head. And while they were doing the MRI, they were asking him questions, specifically looking at his brain activity to see if any of these things would trigger the fear response.
So it was like an fMRI where they're looking at, like, they put the dye in there and shit?
Yeah. Yeah. They make him drink that awesome gray milky solution.
Watch his brain light up.
Yeah. And they were waiting to see if he had a fear response. Guess what? He didn't. And now you have a guy who's probably somewhere on the spectrum closer to having Asperger's, where he has an interesting social dynamic where he's not really great with talking to people and understanding other people. And when you think about it, other people have fear and doubts. Mm-hmm. He doesn't. Of course he's going to have a problem talking to other people. He can't relate.
Yeah.
But when he gets up on a wall and there's nobody to relate to, and all he's got to do is concentrate on the activity, and he's got no fear of falling, But he does understand that that is a risk. He's just not thinking of it in the same sense because he trusts in his abilities. He climbed that whole freaking mountain. And I watched the documentary 3 times. And every time I am still blown away with how this guy, how his mind works. And then I just have to relate it. I don't fear a professional combat sport because of the same things. Like, I've dealt with so much worse. Alex Honnold has taken falls while somebody was holding a rope and belaying him. He has never fallen on his own. So he has no trust in other people holding his life. He has all the trust in himself under those rules, right? Whereas, like, I fear for my life if someone were to swing at me outside your house, because I don't know if they're holding a weapon. I don't know if they have a friend right around the corner. I don't know a lot of things. I have no fear stepping into a cage or a ring or onto mats because I at least know that person doesn't have a weapon and doesn't have anybody who's going to jump in on me. It's a weird thing where it's like you have to associate it with where that person has their comfort. And for me, my comfort is in knowing, like, this might be a dangerous activity to a lot of people, and that's why they're going to shy away, but it's still not as dangerous as some other things I've been through. And my experiences have led me to believe that this, although, yes, we simulate murder, right? We are strangling and joint locking each other to no end, but it's still safer than if I were to get into a fight on the street, where if I take a bad fall and my head cracks on the pavement, that could be it, right? Whereas, yes, I've jammed fingers, hyperextended joints, and like been put out. I've been put to sleep by training partners. That's still safer because at least people are aware of it, and it's not going to lead to me going to the hospital.
Yeah.
Right? Anything that happens out here, totally different scenario. So you got to treat it with a little bit more respect. And I think that's where that disconnect comes with people. They don't understand the difference. So when I watched Free Solo, I'm like, yep, you know what? As crazy as that sounds, I can understand it because he's been through worse trusting other people. He would much rather trust himself in that confined space.
Fuck.
Oh, we got there.
In that confined space is what he said. I'm editing that fucking loud ass noise.
Yeah.
Jesus H. All right. So I have a question, dude.
Let's hit it.
When has your conviction come to almost a complete halt, or a complete halt? And then how the fuck did you get it restarted again?
Man, so when my marriage failed, I looked at myself like, what did I do wrong, right? And it took me a lot of therapy and a lot of talking to buddies and realizing, like, I can only at best blame myself for 50%, right? But when something fails and we're involved, we initially can do a lot of things, but we resonate well with extremes. We either point the finger at the other person and say they're to blame, or we point the finger back at us and we say we're to blame. Where I got over that crap and I started to trust myself.
When you say we, you're referring to just humans in general?
People, humans in relationships, right?
Yeah.
Where I got over that was when I finally came to terms with the fact that these are the things that I could have improved upon that were my doing. But it's still on the other person to accept their part of it. So then you start to understand that it's like, it's equal, right? We both messed this up. And when I got past that, I started to trust in my own decisions again. Because right after that happened, I went through this really depressed point in my life where it's like, man, I don't even really want to talk about it too much, but it got dark, real dark. And I didn't do anything stupid, but I did have a lot of really negative thoughts. And that in turn led to me not doing well in competition. Like, I messed up my last pro MMA fight. I made some critical errors that would not have happened if I were in either a healthy relationship or no relationship at all. Because once again, this is a place where I should have been at my most comfortable, because it's a place where I don't necessarily see the same levels of dangers. But I didn't thrive in that setting because I came into it with all of this other baggage. So I would say right after I reconciled all of my issues following my divorce, I started to stop thinking of the glass half full or half empty. The point is the glass is refillable. and my glass was empty.
Yeah.
And so once I realized it's like, cool, you're allowed to hit empty and refill. Once I was able to do that, it's like, man, I doubled down on my jiu-jitsu, and I went from being a run-of-the-mill purple belt, which is still a great rank. It's the first of the advanced ranks in grappling and jiu-jitsu. I could have been proud of just that milestone accomplishment, but I was like, no, I need to be one of the best black belts. And that was still so far off that it's so hard to focus on the moment, right? But when you realize it's all preparation. If I can use an Abraham Lincoln quote, it was, if I could have 6 hours of time to chop a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours just sharpening my axe. And that makes so much more sense to me now, because when I was going through my failed marriage and the subsequent aftermath of that and all of the depression, I couldn't see past all the shortcomings I had. And therefore, I wasn't allowing myself to work towards a goal and grow. When I finally reconciled the fact that I'm only to blame for half of the mistakes in the relationship, I can now start getting past that and going back into, okay, now I'm going to start preparing for the next step. And the next step for me was getting to be a good black belt, which doesn't start when that belt gets put around your waist. It starts today, right? So when I started doubling down, I went from, and this was a quick turnaround, and I'm not exaggerating because we're on the podcast. Anybody who is at the Pedro Sauer headquarters knows I showed up on January 14th, 2013. That day, I got beat by almost everybody in the room who was my rank, or even some that were lower. And I have no problem admitting that, and they all know who they are. 9 months later, I was one of the toughest guys in the room, and it was a quick turnaround. And then within a year of that, or maybe even a year and a half of that, there were new students that would have no clue of the person I was 2 years prior. They would have no clue, just because in their mind, I was always spectacular. But I will name drop a few people. Kristen DeBrucker, who's currently a black belt under Pedro, who teaches at the academy, the headquarters academy in Herndon, Virginia. She was one of those first people who grappled me that first night. Dan Chamberlain and John Reeves, all of whom are my peers in rank. They're all black belts under Pedro now, and they were all purple belts when I showed up then. And all of them handled me that first night. And now all of them look to me as the guy when I'm at that academy, because of how far I've come in that time period. But it goes back to that conviction. Once I was able to say only half of the blame was mine, it was a huge weight off my shoulders. And the thing about baggage, it goes back to that idea, like, you can come into any relationship, any situation, and bring all of your shit with you, or you can remind yourself that you're the person carrying it, and you could just drop it. You could come back to it later. You could just handle luggage and let go, get on the mats, do what you have to do, and come back to it later. And the best part is, you don't have to do it all today.
There's such a fucking art to that.
There is, but I gotta thank the vet center in Arlington. I don't want to mess this up. The vet center in Alexandria, Virginia. It was a veteran resource tool that's free for veterans, and I initially went there for marriage counseling to try and save my marriage. When it didn't work, I continued there for individual therapy to just get me on the right track so that I can eventually have healthier relationships later. I am still actively engaged in different kinds of therapy, whether it be online tools, reading resources that I check out on my own, or the occasional go in and see an actual therapist. And it's important because we forget, like, we go in, we work our body, we do some cardio, we might play a game, work our mind, but you have to work your emotions too. And if you can't just be like, and I'm gonna name one of my favorite fighters of all time, Mirko Krokop. When
badass.
Yeah, and when you saw him fight Vanderlei the first time, Vanderlei Silva wasn't just called the Axe Murderer because it was a cool sounding name. When they came to stare downs, Wanderlei would look at you and you would just be scared to death and want to run away as if you were being chased by an axe murderer, right? Because he had the look.
Well, and he's like Russian or something, and that's already scary.
No. Wanderlei is Brazilian. Crow Cop is Croatian.
Oh, right, the Croatian sensation.
Croatian sensation. Crow Cop, his name is actually Mirko Filipovic, but he's called Crow Cop because he's Croatian and a police officer.
See, I heard that he's not actually Croatian, that they just gave him that name.
No, I mean, he is the ambassador for Croatia
Okay.
to the U.S., which is badass in and of itself. I would not want to go to the UN and pick a fight with that guy. And that's what he does. He like comes to our country, he sits in for Croatia, and he's an ambassador. That's pretty badass.
I mean,
But
Eastern Europeans are generally badass.
because they have to be, you know, you live off of like potato and dirt, right?
Yeah, and like in a part of the world where like the government's super fucking corrupt and everybody's like learned this really strange way of coexisting together.
You don't have to tell me. When I went through Hungary on my way to a big tournament, I showed up and it looked like World War II the day after. It's still bombed out and depleted and nasty, and people live in that. But going back to what I was going to say was like Crow Cop, when he fights, he is just the embodiment of his training. He is not going in liking you, disliking you, respecting you, or disrespecting you. He is just working. And because he can take his emotion out of it, he can just fire at the right time. Because flashing lights, the heat of the overhead lighting, a referee circling around, the limitation of the cage or the ring, none of that matters to him. He can just zone out and just see through the bullshit and just look at you as a target. And in that sense, he's like a hungry wolf chasing you down. There's only one objective, and that's to get to your prey. And when he stared down Wanderlei Silva, and you see Wanderlei, you know, bouncing around trying to make the angry face, and Crow Cop is just perfectly still like a statue, not blinking, looking at Wanderlei, and then all of a sudden you see Wanderlei look down. I knew at that moment Wanderlei lost the fight. They didn't even make physical contact with each other, and Wanderlei lost that fight. And sure enough, he did lose the fight. He got his ass kicked. That was Crow Cop with no emotion.
I think Thug Rose is like the female version.
Yeah, and I can see that too. But when you look at Crow Cop's first set of UFC fights, especially the fight with Gonzaga, he had emotion going into it. And then look at what happened. And then subsequent fights, like every time he would go on a win, he would come back and he would have emotion, and then he would lose. And then he would have to take that loss to really bury his emotion and then come back and win. But then he would let that high control him. You have to find a way, no matter win or lose, to just do the thing. And for me, I had to reconcile that difference. And when I finally got past all of that, and I could just go back to, I got to do good fundamentals and I got to do this thing. Then you'll see me like smiling and waving to people in mid-match, doing stupid shit. And it's like, that's because I'm on autopilot. I'm just doing mechanics, and that person is a grappling dummy. And it's like, but Dave, isn't that guy a black belt? Yeah, but they're still human. And humans only bend and move in certain ways. And as long as I don't go in with too much emotion of, oh, I gotta win, or oh man, what if I lose, or I respect this guy, or I don't respect this guy. As long as I don't have that baggage when I get on the mat, I'll look really good doing good jiu-jitsu. So before the match happens, you can be as nervous as you want. The second they call your name and they bring you to the center, you need to, once again, metaphorically, let go of your baggage, leave it on the side of the mat, get on the mat and just go on autopilot and just do the things you train to do.
So much fucking shit going through my head right now, dude. Like, you seem like somebody who spends the reason you can't fucking sleep at night is you spend a lot of fucking time negotiating with yourself. And like, so you familiar with the Kubler-Ross model of grief?
Yeah.
And like the bargaining stage where you're like you went through that with your ex. Like,
yeah, and it controls you.
Right, but you had this this bargaining experience with your ex, and then when it didn't, like, you going to therapy to try to save your marriage was like, that was part of your bargaining. And then when it failed, though, you continued the bargain with yourself, and like,
yeah, and it lingered for a bit.
But you win by having there's something in psychology or social psychology called the least interest principle.
I'm not familiar.
So like every fucking interaction that you have with another person is it's a negotiation of a social contract, or that's at least the way that it's discussed, I guess. But like, so every relationship you have is a social contract, and every interaction you have with each person is a negotiation of that contract, and the person with the least interest is the one who has the most power. And so when you go into the fight and you're like getting into that state of mind where you're like, I'm just doing this thing. Like, I have no interest in the outcome of this situation. I'm just fucking doing it. Like, you are negotiating with yourself and you're having a shit ton of power when you do it. Like, it's just really cool to, sorry dude, I can't help it. Like,
no, that's awesome. I had never heard that explained. And that actually resonates with me on a different level, because you've seen the movie Fighter with Tom Hardy.
Is that the one that has like Channing Tatum?
No, I think that's The Fighter.
Oh, Tom Hardy. Is that the one? He's like a boxer.
No,
and he learns to fight. No, that's Southpaw. I don't know, dude.
No. So there's a movie where Tom Hardy is an estranged brother who was a Marine who actually like left his unit. Like he was literally like dereliction of duty, left and just ran away.
Yeah.
And his brother,
oh, I did see that.
And they end up fighting in the finals of this 8-man tournament, right?
Such an intense. I cried during that fucking movie.
That movie is killer. But what I don't like is the ending, because the brother who was only in it for the money won, whereas the brother who was in it for the fact of like he just wanted to be there because he didn't have any sense of self, and he felt like where he shined the most was in showcasing this very obscure talent to a normal civilized human. Most people who like work a 9 to 5 will never understand the joys, the highs and the dizzying lows of fighting, because to them that's barbaric. And it's like to Tom Hardy's character in the movie, it was different. It's showing control over his own self. Like, I have enough invested in my training to where when I go into that ring, I can show you that I can do all of my body movements and not allow you to do yours. And that level of control gives me joy. And that's what he was doing in that movie. He wasn't in it for the money. He wasn't in it for any kind of glory. And if he had won, he would have given his winnings to the widow of his friend who passed away overseas, right? And it's like he had more of a pure reason for doing it, whereas the older brother was like trying to pay for his house that he probably shouldn't have bought in the first place. Like, downgrade, get an apartment, dude. Like, but anyway, that movie, like, not just because Tom Hardy is a Marine, like that had very little to do with my affinity for that character. The reason I liked it was because it's like, man, he came from a troubled upbringing, you know, and he realized he had a skill. That skill happened to be fighting. And where could he show that at a high level where it gives it worth? Fighting on the street is stupid. Not only is it illegal, but you're not getting anything out of it. Even if the paychecks are small and the notoriety is in a very niche market, showing that you have the ability to do something at a high level brings value to yourself. And that is what helps us get through our day-to-day. I don't care if you never make a big paycheck fighting. If you're good at it and you enjoy it, keep doing it.
Literally, like, never made $1 fighting other than as a bouncer.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, some of my biggest paychecks in fighting.
As a cab driver.
Oh, well, that's, yeah, the ancillary fighting that comes from that. But for me, I never made huge paydays in fighting, but I always made enough to keep myself going in the lifestyle I was accustomed to, which was not buying fancy cars, fancy jewelry, and going out all the time.
How long did you... Sorry.
Go ahead.
How long did you fight as an amateur before you went pro? And, like, when did you know that it was time?
So I had been doing teenage local point sparring tournaments and point point rounds as a teenager in Muay Thai and traditional karate and all that shit from like 1988 to 2001.
Shit, how the fuck old are you, dude?
I'm going to be 36 this July, but I started when I was 5 years old in 1988 with traditional martial arts. And so doing like point sparring competitions does not really equal a fight. But here's the thing. Those are still less scary to me than an actual fight. So I would go to these tournaments and smoke fools. And to the point where when I turned 18, I got picked up by a promoter and was like, listen, let's have you do a professional show. Having never done an amateur, a true amateur show as an adult, I turned 18, and 3 days after my 18th birthday, I signed a contract to do a pro fight in a kickboxing organization. And it was overseas too. So then I go and I do this event.
Sounds so fucking wonderful, dude.
It was really just luck of the draw that this guy happened to be at this one event and saw me and was like, this guy has really good movement.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no shit, I've actually had to fight.
Yeah.
So point sparring is a joke. Like, I'm just not gonna get hit, and I'm gonna hit you hard. And so anyway, I get this opportunity and I win this fight, and next thing you know, I'm now a pro in this very obscure sport like kickboxing. In an era when it wasn't very popular in the US. Like 2001, not many people were kickboxing. And then within a few years, I started making the transition into MMA, and I had a bunch of underground fights, and I consider all of those amateur. Even though the rules were really, really scary and no one was being drug tested and no one was doing communicable disease testing for like HIV or like Hep C.
Well, in amateur in Washington State, that shit doesn't get tested either.
And that's scary to me. And that is absolutely scary to me. It's like I can cut you open, you can cut me open, and our blood is just having a dance.
Yeah. It's fucked up, dude. It's gross.
And so in 2005, March of 2005, I get offered a pro MMA bout against James Gabbert for the title for Ring of Combat. Nowadays, Ring of Combat is a huge promotion that has fed over 100 fighters into the UFC. I fought at Ring of Combat 8 in the very early times of that promotion against their current reigning champ. And I went in grossly underweight for the fight, and I still had a great fight. And Matt Serra was legitimately coaching against me in the fight because that was his guy.
Yeah.
So it's funny, like my first pro MMA event, and I've got Matt Serra coaching against me. And I mean, I lost the fight, but man, did it taught me so much in terms of like finding a good camp, learning to train for high level guys, and getting out of my comfort zone. I, at that time, wasn't doing jiu-jitsu, and I had done a little bit of sambo, and I got into jiu-jitsu 3 days after losing via armbar in an MMA fight.
I saw like an MMA fight where you lost to like a key lock.
Kind of. If it's the same fight I'm thinking of, I've been submitted twice in my professional MMA.
I was like, what the fuck? If he's gonna lose he's losing to a submission, like
So if I'm thinking it's the match, it is, right? Because the James Gabbert was clearly an armbar, legs across my chest. If it's the match I'm thinking of with Tyler Rose, it was
Tyler Rose, and I thought that guy. I thought you were gonna fuck him up when I first watched you guys both walk in, and the way that like his look and your look, I was like, that guy's gonna die in that fucking ring.
And you know the interesting thing about that fight, when I look back on it, I think he had just gotten his purple belt, and I was still a purple belt then. But remember the timeline I said when I got to Pedro's? It took me about 9 months to really make that overhaul to my grappling. That was 6 months in, right? So that fight was June 8th, 2013. That was legitimately under 6 months after I'd gotten to Pedro's. So I had made some improvements, but I wouldn't say I was becoming the man I am today yet. I was still doing like the day in, day out grind. So when I had that match, at the end of round one, I still can look back and say he won the round because I failed my first takedown and he ended up on top for at least, I would say, 45 seconds to a minute. Although I didn't sustain any damage in that first interaction, I eventually harpoon reversaled him and tried for a guillotine, but he stood right up. So I didn't end up getting on top on the ground. And then later on, I did take him down, but he immediately bounced back up. So that takedown wouldn't really count by anybody's scorecard. And then at the end of round one, He rocks me hard with an overhand right. I start to stumble back, and he starts to see that and charges in. And I pull guard and lock him up, knowing that I heard the clacker for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So the good news is I took 0 damage in those last 10 seconds because I just locked him down. But he definitely won the round 10-9. So going into the second round, I remember my corner, Jesse Garant, coming up to me and going, hey man, you need to switch your footwork. And I know exactly what he meant. Because much like Rocky in Rocky 3 going up against Clubber Lang, he went in orthodox even though he's a southpaw. And then he made Clubber get onto his timing on his offside before switching back to southpaw and then beating up Mr. T, right? Clubber Lang.
I do that shit all the time.
And it's great. And that was my strategy with Tyler Rose. In that first round, if you watch it again later on.
I know, I saw you switching stances and I was like, that's my guy right there.
Yeah, so I came in orthodox to start, and then at the start of round 2, I came out and I went to southpaw, and that's when I went 1-2 head kick. The problem with it was I didn't realize how hard he had rocked me in round 1.
Oh, shit.
And so when I went to throw my kick, if you watch it, like I sat my hips back through the kick. So their kick had almost no power. So even though it connected right on his jaw, it's almost like throwing a punch and then pulling your shoulder at the end.
Yeah.
So I head kicked with no power. So he looks at it and I'm like, fuck. So then he does proceed to end up getting me in a weird, really weird position where I go to take him down and he ends up on top in this smashed out half guard. And during the scramble, he does secure my arm and gets me in a straight arm lock. Now, if you have watched any of my jiu-jitsu matches from 2014 forward, I don't get straight arm locked because of that fight. At that point in time, though, he catches me and it was just a solid clamp on the arm and I had no twist in the MMA gloves and he legit caught me. And I can't feel bad about myself. He did everything necessary. But I think if I grappled Tyler Rose tomorrow, like just jiu-jitsu, he wouldn't have a chance. Like, and this isn't me putting out an issue challenge on the podcast, but I think that he knows where his jiu-jitsu is today and where my jiu-jitsu is today. And in just that rule set, there's a difference. Whereas when we went into that fight, he was the bigger fighter, size-wise, and he definitely showcased it. Also worth noting was he was 20 years old and I was 30 years old. And that's a huge gap when you talk about the age of a fighter, right? I had been fighting in varying forms for 12 years at that point. That's a lot of mileage. That was his pro debut, and that was my 5th pro MMA fight. But my 70th fight, 71st fight, that's a lot of mileage.
As a pro or?
No, just total amateur pro, underground,
including
everything.
point sparring and stuff?
No. Not including that.
Yeah.
Not including that. I'm clowning my...
People fucking minimize the importance of point. Like when I did point sparring when I was a kid too. And like Hunter and Laura were like, how many fights have you had? And I'm like, well, including what? Because like I started point sparring. I don't even know how many fucking times I've done that.
Learning to throw a punch or a kick
and not get hit, because like it's so much of that is accuracy. The point sparring thing has to be a clean fucking hit, so you have to have good head movement. Like you learn so much shit in point sparring. But
more importantly, learning how to fight while being judged
and watched. Like
people forget that the jitters are real.
That
and
ring rust and thing.
If you don't learn how to compete when people are judging you, you're not going to do well when you step into a cage. And experience, whether it's bad experience or good experience, is still experience. So one of my favorite lines in Avengers Infinity War was in the very beginning when Thanos turned to Loki.
Fucking love you, dude.
Yeah. Thanos turns to Loki and Loki is like, so you're going back to Earth. I have experience. And Thanos makes the joke like, bad experience. And he's like, I count experience as experience. And it's like, that's so freaking true. When people don't understand what it's like to be in even a high school fight when everyone circles up and starts watching, most people will do better in a vacuum.
Dude,
two people go into a closed room and fight, they'll both do much better than with 5 of their closest friends watching. 10 times out of 10.
It's like, dude, this is weird, but the first time you bang someone that you've never banged before, it's so fucking awkward and shitty. I mean, for me anyway, like it tends to be that way. Like you like hook up with some chick you've never fucking hooked up with, and it's a shit show. You got to get that first one out of the way. And with
experience,
with fighting, dude, going into the cage, it's really weird. And now I'm going super weird. I'm just owning it. I'm going weird. Talking about the connection between combat arts and sex. Like, there's so fucking much there. Like, I had to write a fucking essay when I went into the first time I went to college. I wrote a fucking... My very first class that I ever took was, like, English 101, and I had to write a essay, and I had to pick... I could pick, like, whatever thing I wanted to write about. But we had, like, a book that had all these, like, essays in it, and we had to read one essay and then write an essay on the fucking essay. And one of them was like, it was supposed to be like a critical analysis, and this person had like written this essay on a tour they took in France where they were looking at all this like medieval torture shit, but they were writing about it in like a really seductive sexual way. And I was like very Taoist at that time in my life, and I'm like, there's sex and combat are the same fucking thing. One is destructive, one's creative. They're just both opposite ends of the same spectrum. Like,
sex can be destructive too, by the way.
Oh, totally. I already know that I know. He's shaking his head. We're not going there.
I claim nothing.
No, whatever, dude. Look, I am a personal trainer. You've heard me run my classes. You know how dominating I can be in there. And it's
And like, then you're a sub when you're in the bedroom? Is that what you're going to say?
Oh, I'm a switch.
Ah.
Me and some of my friends who most of my friends I've had sex with, so I have a jiu-jitsu gi that is specifically for fucking the bedroom.
Hey, grips are grips. But what I will say is this. I can see that analogy coming into play because there is a level of intimacy in a fight that people don't understand. It's like, I'm going to be in a contact with you that a normal person wouldn't be able to appreciate because, and you've heard this too. Oh, I don't know. I'm really not into grappling because of all the sweat exchange. And it's like, that same person, I guarantee, is fucking somewhere with tons of sweat exchange.
Yeah, and
tons of other bodily fluid exchange, and they don't have a care in the world about that. Yeah. But then when you get into a cage, it's like, listen, man, don't be that guy that claims like you don't go down on a girl because it's gross, or don't be that girl that claims you don't like finish off a guy because it's gross.
I was just telling Brian yesterday that like women are super fucking gross. Like they're really fucking gross. Like I want to add some context. I want to add some context to that. Gross in the right way. What do you mean? Because I'm getting there.
Okay.
So like, I used to work in the restaurant industry for like 10 fucking years, and I was a cook. I did all kinds of shit, but one of the things I did was clean the fucking bathroom. The guy's bathroom, I had to refill the fucking soap like 3 times a night. The women's bathroom, I almost never, I did it like every couple weeks. They didn't wash their fucking hands. And then there was like, so this is totally anecdotal, and this is probably gonna get like misperceived, and I'm probably an asshole, and that's probably correct, but like, I fucking, like, collected this data. Women do not wash their hands, okay? And the tampon things, I had to empty those too. And the times when they used the least fucking soap were the times when they were all synced up and all those tampon things were fuller.
Wow. This is... So, that's a thing. And I don't have any...
My point is, I don't have any experience regardless of how disgusting women are, I still want to bury my face in most of their assholes.
Yeah. I don't have that feel, but I do understand that there is a level of intimacy in the bedroom that we're fine with. And yet someone's going to tell me they can't grapple somebody because they don't want to get that way with a stranger. And it's like, okay, everybody's a stranger until you get to know them, right? How many times in anybody's life do we eventually make that one night stand where it's like, you don't know that person and you're going to do the deed. Yet You're going to tell me you can't come into this classroom and over a span of days, weeks, months, and years get to be familiarized with somebody and deal with their sweat. Like earlier today, I'm working with Ryan with the blonde hair who's in the kickboxing. And he's in the gi jiu-jitsu class with me.
Wait, Ryan what? I think I know
Short blonde hair, tall
he's a
guy.
social worker, like super quiet, really nice.
No, different guy, I think.
Okay.
But Ryan's a cool younger dude, and he had just taken Hunter's kickboxing class before our class. And he comes onto the mat and he's like, dude, I am super sweaty and I apologize. And I'm like, dude, do you think this is the first time I'm going to have another person's sweat potentially hit me in the fucking eyeball?
You know how many times I've caught sweat in my mouth?
Yeah, I don't even want to admit to that on the air, even though we're talking about fucking and all the other things. But it's like,
Welcome to my podcast.
There are so many times, and I'll tell you right now, the two worst times I've had sweat contact. One was sweat going up my nose while I was under the bottom, and I swear it touched my brain. And then another time, I legitimately got swimmer's ear because of sweat going in my ear. Do you know what it's like to not be able to shake that feeling of water inside your head, knowing it's not water?
It's not even yours.
It's not even yours, and it's not from a pool. It is literally sweat from somebody else's body. So, like, you know, I have to get so comfortable in the uncomfortable that when people tell me stuff like, I don't know if I could ever do that, I'm like, cool. Now get into a fight. Mm-hmm. Fighting is one of the most uncomfortable things in the world, and we could talk about the psychology of fight or flight, but the studies don't lie.
Don't leave out freeze.
What's that?
Don't leave out freeze.
Yeah, fight, flight, or freeze.
Happens.
It does, and I think it's worth noting that in any of those three interactions, two biological functions will happen. The abdominal muscles contract and the sphincter tightens, right? And we got to understand why that is. And when we get ready to flight, one biological function happens directly following that. The sphincter opens so we can drop a deuce, lighten our load, and run. Deer do this all the time. So when you hear drop, scat, and flee, it's because when a deer senses something that they can take on and they're going to charge at it and gorge it with their friggin' antlers, or at least like front kick it to death, they're ready to fight. When it's something that they're afraid of, they will drop, scat, and run, right? And then you hear deer in headlights. That's the freeze, right? Mm-hmm. No matter what, you tense your stomach, you tighten your sphincter. When it's time to go, and I tell people this all the time, this is why it's also important to take a pre-tournament shit. But seriously,
before the gloves go on, because like once those gloves go on, like Coach Hunter, he's like, dude, like when it's time to get the gloves on and they tape them up and shit, Coach Hunter's like, dude, make sure you pee because I'm not holding it for you.
Yeah, but I mean, we could talk about that to no end. The other aspect of this that's worth talking about is, you know, you do this because you don't want to have biology beat your mind. Right? If you have to go into a situation where fear is a part of it, and your body is telling you that there's a biological function it wants to perform, you're not going to be able in that moment to tell it no. So when I think back to...
You're such a fucking amazing nerd, dude.
I am. But let me tell you about Felice Herrig. My good friend, Jeff Curran, who's had over 80 pro MMA fights, and is one of the pioneers of MMA in America. You know, fought Uriah Faber before Uriah became a name. Fought Benavidez, fought all these great dudes, fought Barrett Yoshida. I remember watching Jeff Curran's fights in the 90s and 2000s when it was hard to find MMA fights. And when I was on a reality fighting card in Atlantic City in 2007, back when all the guys from Tap Out Crew, Skyscrape, Punk Ass, and Mask was still alive, they had a show called Tap Out the Series. I wasn't on the series per se, but I was on the same card where they were following this one fighter whose nickname was Sunshine. And Matt Fedora Rosa, whatever, he was training at the time under Jeff Curran. I remember being backstage sharing a locker room with all the fighters from that corner, and Jeff Curran was back there, and I went up to Jeff and I was like, I'm such a huge fan of yours. I know you got your guy. I'm not going to bother you. Just wanted to say that. He's like, cool, thanks. And then he goes back to his guy. Who would have thought that was 2007 when I had that fight against Don Wagner? Speaking of contact and bodily functions, like I remember going into that fight and I had his blood covering my face, my chest, and my shoulders because I broke his nose in round 1. And then in round 2, broke his nose in round 1. While we're on our stools during the break between round 1 and 2, I see him gasping for air out of his open mouth because his nose is just busted. And I was like, I am totally kicking this guy in his open mouth. Straight up. That was my strategy. And
Make him bite his goddamn tongue off.
well, it was worse than that. So now he's only wearing a top row mouthpiece, not a full. And most fighters do. And like, it's something that we decide on before the fight, what kind of mouthpiece you want to wear. Well, he's wearing his top row mouthpiece and I connect right along the jawline on his open mouth. So now with no protection on his bottom row of teeth, my kick hits him right on the teeth and his teeth split his cheek from the molars all the way to the canine. And he's got this massive 3-inch gash on the side of his jaw. So now his nose is bleeding and his mouth is just wide open. And it's like he has another mouth on the side of his face.
Oh my God.
So now I start.
Can you see his teeth through the hole?
If you opened it up, yeah, but it's just a cut, right? If you spread it, you absolutely could. It went clean through. So now as I'm throwing my jab and pulling it back, blood is accumulating on my glove. And the rule about throwing a jab is as fast as you throw it out there is as fast as you have to pull it back. So now I'm throwing my jab, and as it's coming back, the blood is whipping off of my glove and over my shoulder. So now I am getting covered in his blood. If I was squeamish, you wouldn't be able to be in that situation. Even if you're not squeamish, the biology of it is you see that much blood, you can get very queasy and not realize it, and your body might want to tell you to vomit, crap your pants, piss your pants, whatever. It's just like you start to have this weird sensation. An apex predator sees that blood and they get the exact opposite effect. They're going to do more damage and rip their prey apart. And I was of that second, which is, okay, cool, I'm going all in. It takes a weird type of person to take your biology and put it in like the back burner and just go full in on the primal aspects of being top of the food chain. Not everybody who fights is that. And sometimes it takes getting in there to realize what you are. And man, I remember being in that situation and being, and after the fight was over and being like, man, I am so glad I did all my biological functions before, because once I stepped out of the cage or the ring in that particular fight, after I stepped out of the ring and I went backstage, my body wanted to do all of the above. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to piss. I wanted to shit. I wanted to do all of this stuff because now I was able to control it for that time period. And now that it's over, all of that feeling is going through my senses. And you can't control it. You can control it in the moment, but now the moment's over. Now you can't fight biology. And we don't know that half the time until you get into that situation. And it's like, man, you're absolutely right. It's better to vacate your body of all of those fluids and forces beforehand, because you don't want to be that person afterwards shaking with jitters and being unable to like hold it in like you're some incontinent old person, right? Or a small child. And that's what happens. And that's the part of the sport that nobody talks about. Or
dude, I didn't know. You're looking at me like
or
no, but there is a person who we both know who like won a fight because they had to shit.
Yeah.
Like they were like, we got to end this now.
Yeah.
Knock the guy out.
Yeah. And that was a funny match. But, you know, going back to Jeff Curran and that whole fight, like I went through that in 2007. And then not too long ago, his fighter Felice Herrig had a UFC fight. And she's fought in the UFC 5 or 6 times now, and she's doing really well. But one of her most notable fights wasn't because she had a great fight per se, but because her opponent shit herself in the UFC octagon. And a lot of people still mess with her opponent over that because once that happens, you can't live it down. The good news is her opponent got ahead of it and went on Twitter and was like, shit happens, you know? So she laughed about it, and that's good. But think about it. Why did that happen? Was she sick? Was she unable to hold it together? No. Even at the UFC level, which we sometimes think of as the highest, which it's not, but we think of it as that, you can't fight biology. So if you don't go into your fight knowing what could happen, or if you think because you got away with it before, you can get away with it again, that's rookie mentality. And her opponent, Felice's opponent, went in full bowels, and in the midst of, oh crap, it literally was an oh crap situation. Mm-hmm. So, you know, thankfully, I've had experience in the past with knowing like, this is what can happen. Because I remember getting curb stomped and, you know, ended up getting the scars on my chin and everything.
I don't even see scars.
Yeah, it's just weird how I have like 2 individual notches on my chin. But I remember going home, pulling off my underwear and realizing like, oh, damn, there's a nugget there. And you know what? You wouldn't think that, but when they say I'm going to kick the shit out of you, that can happen, right? And, you know, I'm getting kicked in the abdominal area while I'm down by multiple people. What do you think's going to happen? So, you know, going into my amateur and professional career, that was always something that had been on my mind. Like, don't let that happen to me.
Don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy. But there's more to it than that. I want to be that person that is going to fight. When I flex my abdominal muscles, my sphincter tightens, it's time to throw a powerful punch or a kick, as opposed to get my legs ready to spring and run. And that was me since 18, right? So now I'm going to be 36 this summer, which means I will have been fighting half of my life in a professional way.
Yeah.
It's been 18 years since I was 18 fighting overseas. And that's a lot of experience. So when I encounter...
But even before that, you were a fighter.
Yeah, I fought for different reasons.
But like
just not in
fighting.
a professional sense.
Yeah.
But when I think about it, it's like, man, more than half of my life after the summer will have been at a professional level competing.
Sorry.
No problem. So it's still interesting to me when I go into the gym and I show a technique and I'll have random dude 1 or 2 say, but what about, and fill in the blank. And I go,
like me when I was like doing the bench press thing.
Yeah, but
and I want you to know that when I told you that like I had learned that from somebody else, like I wasn't challenging what you were telling me.
No, and that's fine. And that's the difference between me and say like a purple belt, like the guy who showed you, who's a good friend of mine. But it's like,
and a fucking beast.
Yeah, he is. But once again, it's a levels thing, right? Like he has great ability within his level, and then I have a different level of understanding on the same topic that's just greater depth. He might have a breadth, like a wide range of information, but I have that plus depth.
Yeah.
And so it's a little different. And because it had worked for him at certain levels, it's fine until it's not. And then even he will change. So it's one of those things where I wish I wasn't teaching 5 years ago.
I gotta tell the story so people have context.
No. We don't have to tell the story per se. We just have to know that there was a technique that was shown or that was executed that didn't work under this one circumstance that more than likely, and once again, more than likely would work if it wasn't you doing it against me. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, because Dave is a fucking badass, dude.
Well, grappling, right?
I've never had my ass handed to me by the same person so many fucking times.
But understand that if we were striking, you would do much better. It just so happens...
Dude, I don't know about that.
Listen, I do, and this is why. You have way more experience doing that than you do grappling.
Yeah, I'm definitely...
That's all I'm comparing it to. Where your grappling is, I know that your striking is better. So 100% you would do better here. I'm not saying you're going to kick my ass here.
I'm like a baby grappler.
Yeah, and that's okay. You're allowed to know where you're not the best. So for the most time in my fighting, I had thought of myself as a striker because I grew up with karate, kung fu, and kickboxing. And then when I got into fighting, I got into it in strictly kickboxing, no grappling. And let me add some depth to that, because when I say no grappling, I understand that the clinch is a form of grappling, but no grappling on the ground. And although I had wrestled in high school and in college, and then ultimately later on in the Marine Corps, I wrestled, my wrestling was not wrestling for fighting, it was wrestling for sport. Yeah. Wrestling for fighting is totally different. And you have to learn how to wrestle off of your back. And then when I finally got into jiu-jitsu was long after that. So when I went pro in MMA, I thought that my high school and collegiate wrestling was all I needed. That is asinine. You need so much more than that at a pro level for MMA. And when I encounter people that are pros in MMA that don't have at least a purple belt in jiu-jitsu and at least, a stringent, very by the books approach to ground fighting in their build up to their fight, in their camp, they're doing themselves a disservice, because it's not called mixed striking arts, it's called mixed martial arts. And it means the fight can be anywhere. And right now, do you know where I see the biggest gap in all of MMA?
Dude, I don't know about you, but I see it in takedowns. Fucking from going from standing, the transition.
Yeah, and you know what? You're on the right track. And I think that there is a case to be made for that. But mine is a little bit different, but similar, and they're connected. Fighting off the cage.
Okay, yeah.
Because if you can't learn to take somebody down off of the cage,
happens.
It does. But if you can't learn to take somebody down off of the cage, you probably shouldn't be in the cage. If you can't learn to pin somebody against the cage, you probably shouldn't be in the cage. If you don't know how to cut off, and I understand that in a squared ring, like a boxing ring or a Muay Thai ring, it's really easy to cut corners when there are 4 90-degree corners. In an octagon, when each of those corners is more rounded, it's really hard to cut somebody off. But if you don't know how to work your footwork to make somebody end up with their back against the cage, that is also not understanding cage work. And right now, the biggest disparity in all of mixed martial arts that requires a cage, I don't care if it's a hexagon or an octagon, is people not knowing how to use the actual structure you're in for your fight. So the last great cage fighter, meaning not just someone who fought in a cage, but someone who used the cage as a part of their repertoire, was Randy Couture. And when I watch Randy's last fight,
such a fucking beast.
And he's from this area, went to Western Washington. And when I think of Randy isn't just one of my idols and heroes, but when he opened Extreme Couture in New York and I met him for the first time, and my buddy Eric Uresk worked for him at Extreme Couture in New York. It was a short-lived program that was in Center Reach, Long Island. But when I met Randy back then, I was still just blown away, because here's a guy who by all rights should not have been fighting. He had a career up until he was 45 years old.
Oh, shit. Would you mind answering?
He had a career up until he was 45 years old in a sport where most people don't make it past 35. And he was still winning. And when I remember seeing Randy do his stuff, it was just such an incredible experience for me, because how was he winning? And I look at his last fight with Brock Lesnar, and he had Brock pinned against the cage. He had Brock pinned against the cage and did his work. That's something you don't see nowadays. And so I just totally appreciate that element of the fight, where now you just don't have people doing it.
Well, I love that Brock Lesnar got his ass kicked.
Yeah, recently. Yeah.
Okay, I have to pause this for peeing, and also because my friend just walked in the door.
Cool. Hiatus.
Yeah. You have to hit the play button and not the... Okay, so anyway, we just had a conversation about Good Will Hunting, and had talked about some shit that was real as fuck, and missed it because I didn't hit the right button when it was time to record.
It's again. Okay. Just understand that the scene where the therapist, which is played by Robin Williams, is talking to Matt Damon, and he's talking about how not one particular body of work is going to encapsulate any person, right? Even if you look at a character in fiction and you're like, man, I relate, relating is not the same as being, right? So Matt Damon's character hasn't had any real experiences, and so what? He can quote whatever book. Congratulations, you haven't lived life. And that scene was so powerful to me for many reasons. But then going back to the last thing you said, which was the scene where they're hugging it out and they actually came to their breakthrough. Prior to that scene, when he was talking about, you know, his dad putting out the belt, the bat, or the wrench, and he's like, which one would you choose? And he's like, the wrench, because fuck him. It's like that scene, that line to me.
I cannot not cry watching that.
Yeah, and that one scene right there is the scene in the movie that messes me up the most. Because it's like, you know what? If I had a choice between all the hardest things I've ever been through in my life, yes, some things are so hard, you definitely never want to go through it again. But at the same time, you need to show a level of resilience in the face of adversity that makes the adversity not so terrible. And this is the thing about Marines that I loved the most. The things that I hated the most were like all the pomp and circumstance and whatever. Like that shit can go in the trash. And I know a lot of people love putting on uniforms and like parading.
Because you're skipping over a lot of shit for people.
People who parade around and dress blues and go to the balls and take pictures to put on Facebook, that's the crap I can do without.
Yeah.
But when it's like you only packed 3 of those packets of MREs, the meals ready to eat, the basically
So
like
I love those things.
It's like astronaut food with.
It's disgusting, but when I was a kid, like we had an army friend who we were poor as fuck and we didn't have any food in our fridge, and he brought us boxes of those things.
Yeah,
and I learned to love them.
Yeah, so it's like I remember going on one of the last combat operations I was in Afghanistan, and I was an infantry Marine, so it's like I did what the Marine Corps is meant to do, like fight wars. I wasn't like signing checks or, you know, all the other jobs. I was in the fucking heat of the Afghanistan conflict in 2009 through 2012. And I remember we prepped for this operation and they were like, okay, cool, you're going to be out there for 3 days. So in my mind, I'm like, cool, nothing ever goes to plan. I'm going to prep for 5. So I brought 5 MREs. Joke's on me, we were out there for 10.
Oh, fuck.
Cool. I grew up poor. I know what it's like to not eat for days, or I also know what it's like to ration your fucking food. So I was fine. And I remember being a squad leader at that point in time. I was a corporal, which is like 1 step below a sergeant, and it's actually really hard to be a sergeant in the infantry in 4 years. So, you know, it's more impressive that I was at that stage where I was. And I had guys in my squad who didn't prep like I didn't know how to ration their food, and we're on day 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. And I am legitimately giving up my food to these young dudes who are 18, 19, and 20 most of the time. And I had gone in when I was 25, and at this point was 29 years old with real life experience, fought MMA, did all this shit, was homeless at 15, lived on the streets for 9 months, did all this other stuff. And like these guys
You have so much fucking shit in common, dude.
Yeah, and these guys don't even know what it's like to be missing a meal. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, guys, you need to understand sleep is a crutch. Food is a crutch. We can skip a little of this, a lot of this, a little of that, or whatever, but it's not going to break you.
Yeah.
And it's that
Some
adversity.
people will break them because they allow it to.
And because they're the person that would choose the belt. Yeah. They would choose the thing that gives them the least amount of pain. Because
Jesus Christ.
But here's the part of that scene that fucks me up emotionally. I know that if his dad had grabbed the belt, the beating would have been longer.
Yeah.
And I know that if his dad grabbed the wrench, it might have been a shorter but more savage beating. And it's like, I'm the kind of guy that's like, give it to me hard and raw one time and I'll look past it, because pain will go away and your body will heal.
Yeah.
But don't think for a minute you beat me.
But you're like also like minimizing the trauma that, because like the whole time we've been talking, like you're this like really you're a lot like, so I'm fucking not, I feel like I am not anywhere near as fucking accomplished as you, and that's definitely the truth. 100%.
Yeah, but it
provable on paper and everything.
Yeah, sure.
But like, dude,
for what?
But listen, like, I can relate to a lot of the things that you're talking about, and like, we don't know each other's life stories, and I actually really want to fucking hang out more and like get to know you better. But like, we have a lot in fucking common that we both know it. Like, I can look, we can have this conversation and know there's a lot of unspoken shit that we can relate on and shit.
You know how they say game recognizes game? You know, like, you never heard the phrase like game recognizes game, or like
Is that game dar?
No. But you know, it's kind of like it's one of those things where it's like, you know your own. You can just sense when you have a kindred spirit. Yeah. And I can, the same way, like when I was dealing with guys in my squad, especially if it was like my last combat tour, I got put with a specialized team where we all came from very different individual units and came together to form this one team. And now I'm meeting guys for the first time, and we did a very sped up training exercise to get us ready to then go and deploy. And it's like, man, I have to get really close to these guys really quickly. So you have to open up to them, but you also, just upon meeting somebody, know within a moment whether there's like this weird, and I don't want to use the word attraction, so I'll use affinity, where it's just like you get each other, right? And there's this weird connection.
Are you like, do you have an aversion to the idea of being attracted to dudes?
Not in that sense, but I just want to make sure I'm being clear with when I say attraction. I mean, like, fucking positive and negative ions will attract to each other, right? Oh, okay. But I mean, like
magnetism.
Yeah, and there is an unspoken magnetism between people, especially in combat arms, where I'm trusting you with my life to cover me on whatever sector. Yeah. So we have to work together, and we have to work together in the sense that your whole body is made up of a bunch of different parts that all make it so that your body can go to the fridge, get food, go to sleep, do this stuff. Yeah. And we're doing all these functions all the time in unison. Yeah. When I think of a squad of Marines or a squad of anybody in a combat scenario, they have to be operating on the same sheet of music. Yeah. And in order for that to happen, you can't have tension. You can't have people not trusting each other. You have to be able to say, if I go to sleep, you're watching everything. And if vice versa, you know you can trust me.
There has to be trust.
And so it's weird how you'll develop that with people that come from maybe a different lifestyle, but you'll find your similarities. Yeah. The same way that water will find its lowest point, like, we all have something different from each other, but we're all going to find something we have in common.
Well, it's like my friend Landon, who was, I think, on episode 27, came onto this podcast and was talking about, I asked him about resilience. He's like...
Is this Landon Showalter?
No, different Landon.
Okay, different Landon.
But Hunter and Laura do know him.
Yeah, but I almost fought him in 2005, by the way. Just a quick aside.
That's the reason I don't fight at 170. Is Gunner and Landon. I will never fucking go into a cage with them. I'm even at 155, I'm shorter than almost everyone I fight, and I have short arms, dude. I don't have good reach.
So that's where we are the most different.
Yeah, because you're tall. You literally are sponsored by Lanky.
Yeah, so I'm 70 inches tall, and I have a 79-inch reach. I am built like a fucking pterodactyl. Yeah, so we're totally different there. And but I don't blame you for not wanting to fight guys that you know and guys that you...
It's not even about that. It's like they could kick my ass because they have a biological advantage. Like, they're physically like even if I had a 100% perfect fucking fight IQ and was really on top of my game, I would still be challenged. And
sure.
Yeah, those guys are fucking... They're just
that makes for a hard battle. Yeah. And I feel you on that front.
I have to cut like 20 pounds of water every time I fight.
I mean, I would do that too, but I also walk around at 195, and for me it was like...
You're walking at 195 right now?
I was.
Okay.
I was. Hell no. Right now I'm like 182.
Dude, I'm 190.
Yeah, and you're much more filled out than I am.
Well, and I'm fat because I drink a lot right now.
Okay, but this is something that doesn't necessarily mean you will in 3 months.
No.
Right? But for me, when I was fighting at 170, I would walk around at 195 and I would have way more cushion and like power to throw around in training. And then I would cut 20 pounds of water and I'd diet the rest down. And I would make the 169.9 or 170.9 cutoff. And I'm
Dude,
five.
if I was in the ring, if I walked into the ring and you were on the other side of it, I would fucking shit my pants.
But you know what?
Going back to the biology thing, like I would shit my fucking pants.
and like that picture I showed you of me hitting inside the range of the other guy as he's throwing the strike, and it's like I had that biological advantage a lot of the time, but that is also a crutch. So going back to the idea of like the Goodwill Hunting analogy, it's like, man, I would much rather suffer and show that I am not beaten, because that's the resiliency. And ultimately, as a squad leader, I would do that time and time again so that the squad would look to me for guidance and be like, well, fuck, here's this guy not sleeping, not eating, still getting the job done. I shouldn't bitch. And even if they did, they knew that it wasn't that it was falling on deaf ears. It's that I understand their suffering and I'm showing them it's not the end. And man, I remember that same op. We leave at like 3:30 in the morning. It's dark as fuck. We have our night vision goggle, right? Our NVG, and we're loading up on those rotary wing aircraft where the props can turn so it can take off like a plane or it can take off like a helicopter. It's called an Osprey, a V-22.
I know what you're talking about.
And those things are scary as fuck.
That's
Scariest I've ever been in my life.
the coolest shit ever, dude.
No, I disagree.
I'm a machinist, so I'm coming from like aerospace machining. Like,
Sure,
that is
and it
a
is the
cool
worst
fucking
invention
machine.
ever created in the history of mankind. More people have died in the invention of that aircraft than any other aircraft, and I know why. Because it defies everything that is the aviation community.
Yeah.
And when they want to land, they can't 90 degrees. So now you're turned sideways and they do like a death spiral all the way down. And you're subjected to 7 G's of force for the whole descent. So now you get there and they tell, and as the craft rights itself, they land and now it's get the fuck out. Cool. Your body just got sucked into the end of centripetal force.
You're going to a totally different place. I never would have fucking ever gone there in my head.
No.
You've got a different
and now
experience with those things.
And now you've got to somehow build yourself up to get on your 2 feet and move off the aircraft.
Dude,
you get off.
You say you don't like IPA? Try this.
Oh, Jesus.
So fucking good.
I know.
Try it.
I love the smell of it. I mean, I'm just not a bitters fan for the sake of bitters. And I feel like IPAs are in this constant pissing match with each other to see who can put the most hops into a beer.
Really?
That's what I feel.
So I have a rule that I don't drink anything that's less than 7%.
Okay, that's fine. And you
that's
know
why
what?
I drink IPA.
And you know what? You can have a Russian Imperial Stout that's 18%.
Yeah, but you get fat.
Do you?
The amount of alcohol, the amount of beer in this stage and chapter of my life, the amount of fucking beer that I'm drinking, if it was stout, I'd be like 100 pounds heavier.
And here's where I disagree. And before we get back to that other story, I feel like if you had one Dark Lord beer from Three Floyds, one bottle, in one sitting, you'd be the fucking man. And here's why. If you make it through half the bottle and you're not just completely shit-faced drunk and you're still drinking, we have bigger problems in life. Right?
I love that we're talking about beer right now because, like, we haven't even touched on b-boying, and I really want to talk to you about that.
We'll talk about it. But here's the thing. I can have as many of these Hefeweizens as I want, and I'll enjoy it. If I had 4 of those, I'd be slurring my speech. We wouldn't even have a conversation. If I had one Dark Lord, I'd be toast.
But, like, how come you don't drink Coors Light?
There's a point in time where you just have to remind yourself, like, if I'm drinking Coors Light, I might as well have water, right?
Right.
Like, why am I going to spend that much money to drink water?
I recently, like 2 days ago, met some people who were like, every time you come over to our house on the weekend, you're going to get fed, but you always have to show up with Corona. I'm like, I brought IPA. Like, why? Because I didn't know I was going there. I just happened to go there. But, like, I brought IPA with me, and I'm like, dude, Corona, you have to drink, like, fucking 3 times as much of it to get the same effect. And they're like, yeah, but that's the point. We want to drink. We like the action of it.
And you're not wrong. And where I differ is like, first off, I like reds, browns, and then darker beer. And it has nothing to do with the fact that my last name is Porter.
It feels like you're talking about people.
I mean, that's not wrong either, but... And
South Bronx, South Bronx.
I just think it has to do with... It's less a cultural thing and more of a... I hate to say this, but like, the average white person I encounter has less in common with me than the average person of color. Yeah. The average person of color has encountered more things in common with me than the average Caucasian person I come in contact with.
Bellingham has this reputation for being like this super peaceful liberal place where like everybody's taken care of and shit, but I am the anti-statistic. Like, I'm the fucking reason. I'm the one here to fucking tell the truth about like everything that's swept under the rug about this fucking place, because I've lived here. I was born here. I've lived in Colorado a couple times, but I grew up here, and I lived in a fucking like the worst. So there's a couple bad neighborhoods in town, and they're not as bad as like probably like what you grew up in, but there's a lot of fucking shitty parenting and fucking drug addiction and all the gang violence, especially back in the 90s, dude. Like, there was people who came here to get out of fucking trouble and then continued to make trouble for themselves, and that became my trouble because like I lived in a house that was like, well, I lived in like 5 different fucking houses, but I lived in a lot of houses and most of them were overrun with... Dude, I'm pod hogging.
Okay, but let's bring it back then.
But at one point, I was the only white kid in the neighborhood, and I did get fucking jumped every fucking day, and I got smashed in the head with a rock when I was like 10, and like all this other shit because I was white.
Yeah. So let's bring it back for a second. I leave this Osprey, and this is on an op that we were told is going to be 3 days. It ends up being 10. But understanding that we leave at 3 a.m, it's dark as fuck. We get dropped off at this compound that we took satellite surveillance of, and we're like, this is the spot. So we get dropped off. Now, the night before this op, we get these 2 attachments to our squads. One guy's name is Nate Yakubishin, and they called him Jack for short because no one in their fucking right mind can pronounce Yakubishin.
I can.
Right? But if you saw it on paper, you'd be like, that's not that name. So anyway, we get this guy, he's a combat engineer, and we're gonna be utilizing him to sweep for IEDs, the improvised explosive devices, with a metal detector, and if need be, like breach a door or a bunker.
All I hear is fisting.
Yeah.
Breaching? No, sweeping for IUDs.
Oh, not IUDs, IEDs. But we get this guy attached to our squad, and we didn't even really know these guys. We basically like learn their names, they sleep in the forward operating base that we were out of, and then the next morning at 3 a.m, we all take off. Now we take over this compound. As we get dropped off, they're sweeping, and we're all like in an ant trail, like following the guy behind the guy, and so we're in this line so that whoever's sweeping, we're all walking in that person's footsteps. We take over this compound by jumping over this wall. Then we take all the precautions of filling sandbags and like fortifying it from the inside. And that way, if they shoot through the wall, they hit the sandbags, right? And we're doing this for a few hours until the sun comes up. Now we have 3 squads. My squad, so Porter's squad, Rodriguez's squad, so Rod, and Quashin. Rod squad and Q squad, Quashin. So these 3 squads. We have a lieutenant with us and a staff sergeant with us and these attachments. We have some military police involved, and we had a dog that was with us. And she was also for sweeping for mines and shit. And so we have this huge group. And so it's an entire platoon in this compound. And the way it works is one squad goes on patrol to search the area and like expand our area of influence. One squad goes up on the corners and is on post and watching our compound. And then the 3rd squad is on rest. When the squad gets back from patrol, they go on rest. The squad that was on rest goes up to post. The one that was on post goes to patrol. And we just keep that cycle. We literally started this cycle. After just taking over this compound and digging sandbags for hours. And the person who goes out of the wire first is this guy, Yakubishin. Now, the way it works, because the IED threat is so massive in Afghanistan, we have what's called 15 meters of dispersion. So that's 45 feet between every person in the squad. So you have 12 people in a squad, and Yakubishin leaves the wire, and the next person has to wait until 15 meters before they leave. Before the third person even leaves the compound, a blast goes off. And I start getting my flak on because my squad was the one on rest, and Rodriguez's squad, Rod's squad, was the one that just went out on patrol. Q's squad is up on post, so they're already flacked up with rifles, but they can't come off of post. So my squad, I start yelling at them.
Do the rifles hand gesture that you just did? Because it literally looked like you've held a rifle a lot when you did that.
Yeah, just understanding like the rifle, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I'm sorry. It's just
very
real.
I mean, I did 2 combat deployments with 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, both in Afghanistan in the heat of shit in Afghanistan. So it's not like, once again, it's not like I had some very cushiony job and just got to claim the title of Marine. Mm-hmm. I was doing Marine shit in the worst place imaginable.
Dude.
And so the only way you can be like, oh man, I had it worse. Did you take over fucking Baghdad in 2003? Cool. If you didn't, then I might as well be talking to a Vietnam vet.
Can I just say real quick, when I publish this episode, I'm going to tag fucking Tony Garcia, who is the striking coach at West Coast Fight Club. He was the very first person on this podcast, and he's a Marine. Cool. And like, he's gonna fucking love this.
Good. Yeah, man. Let me know. But let me finish this real quick and say, no. Let me finish this real quick. So a blast goes off. Our lieutenant, who's a good dude, but was brand new. This was his first combat deployment. He starts screaming, incoming. Now, incoming means indirect fire from like a mortar or from like an artillery round. That's not what happened. This guy clearly stepped on an IED. So I'm like, sir, with all due respect, that's an IED. And I start flacking up my squad, and I'm like, get ready.
What does flacking mean?
So the flak jacket is your protection, right? Okay. So you put on this crazy 50-pound vest with your ammo and everything on it, grenades. Sometimes you have comms and maps and other shit, right?
It's a bomb shelter suit.
Yeah, and it has your individual gear associated with like whatever your job is. So like me as a squad leader, I have radio communication batteries, maps, pens, all that shit, in addition to all my rounds of ammo, grenades, and all that other shit. Fucking water hydration system and a Camelback on your back, and it's heavy as fuck. So to give you an idea, you take this thing off, you put it on the ground, it stands straight up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's heavy as fuck, but it will protect you. And the whole time you have like what looks like a rolled up knapsack on your back. Well, when it's time to go, you pull off these little strips and it flaps down. You pull it underneath your crotch and up the front, and it's a combat diaper. It's made of Kevlar, but if a bomb blast goes off, you'll still have your twig and berries.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because
probably your most favorite piece of gear that is the most uncomfortable to wear, but trust me, if you get hit in a blast, the first thing you're going to do is, am I good?
Wasn't there a landmine that was invented in World War II that by the Germans that like it shoots a thing up into your crotch?
Well, yes, but remember, it's not necessarily your crotch. They're trying to get your abdomen, because if it can shred your intestines, your stomach, your liver, you're going to die, right? So anyway, we're
not talking about German engineering. This is like IEDs. So this is people.
But sometimes they're using what's called a legacy mine, which is like something the Russians left behind in the 80s and 90s when they were fighting the Mujahideen. So they'll find these old fucking mines with military grade explosives and then just amp them up with homemade explosives. So it's the shit they're doing in Afghanistan up to the point where I'm at could be like the equivalent of some fertilizer and cat piss, or it could be like military grade explosive.
Dude.
And you don't know.
Dave, your fucking heart is so fucking heavy. How the fuck do you set down your luggage to go onto the mat, dude?
It's easy. It's easy, and I'll get there. But understanding, like, we just took over this compound, and Yakubishin just got hit. And now I know it was an IED, but I can't see on the other side of the wall if he's alive. And I'm telling my squad, get the fuck ready. Mm-hmm. So now they start flacking up, getting their weapons, and we're ready to go.
Dude, everybody hears you saying, like, you tell your squad to get the fuck ready, but I don't feel like people are recognizing that when you're saying that, you're, like, fearing for their death.
I am, but understand that it gets worse than that. The enemy doesn't know we're in this compound.
Yeah.
Right? We came in the middle of darkness and started setting up shop. But now a bomb just went off. And now there's a plume of smoke in daylight and the sound of the bomb blast. They now know we're here. So now I'm getting my guys ready for what will more than likely be, for some of the members of this squad, their first ever time in combat. And we're pulling in a living person who is fucked up. He's missing most of his right leg below the knee. His left leg is turned in the wrong direction, and he's missing some of his fingers. Now, luckily, his weapon was blown up to shit, but somehow everything above his knees, through to his midsection and his face are fine. So by the grace of whatever higher power you believe in, he is alive, but not for much longer if we don't fucking work. Now, the corpsman that got assigned to us, who is our medic, came from a hospital who had never deployed in the 17 years he did naval medicine. This is his first time seeing real blood and guts on a battlefield. And what happens? Fight, flight, or freeze, right? He froze. So now I push him to the side, and this is not my squad, and I'm pulling out tourniquets from this guy's gear and putting on a second tourniquet on his leg to stop the bleeding, because you know a femoral artery will bleed faster than anything else in your body, even your jugular. So you have to treat lower limb injuries with crazy respect. So now we put on a tourniquet, we make this moldable splint for his other leg, and we don't do any bone setting, but we at least try to put his foot in the right direction on his other leg, and we get him bandaged up. Meanwhile, the lieutenant and the squad leader are calling in for a helicopter to come in to pick this guy up, and they call in for what's called a hoist. This basket that drops from the helicopter, put him on this, and it zips him up. Mm-hmm. They call him in. Now, as a part of this casualty evacuation 9-line script that they're reading, one of the things that they ask is, do you need added security for the medevac helicopter? We said no. Why we said no, I have no fucking clue, because I didn't call it in.
Because you're fucking in the middle of combat and, like, completely fucking insane.
But you know what? This isn't to bash on the brand new lieutenant or anybody who called it in. They're just in the heat of the moment calling in as fast as they can. Yeah. So by the time it takes them to scramble back at the base, wherever the fuck that was, like 20, 30 kilometers away, to scramble a medevac helicopter to us, we're now getting shot at from all sides. Dude. Because there's a plume of smoke in the air saying, Marines here.
Yeah.
Right? So now we have all this fire coming in at us. I'm treating a guy who's not even in my squad. And like, he's conscious, but the chemicals that went up in the blast are now in his eyes, and he can't open his eyes, and it's in his mouth, and he's asking for water. And the one thing you want to do, this guy who's bleeding for his fucking country and potentially going to die is asking for water. And you want to give this guy water, but you can't. Because if you give him water, you're going to wash those chemicals into his mouth, into his internal organs, and possibly poison this guy.
Dude, how can you feel good about bleeding for a country that, okay, look, and this, I really don't want to hurt your feelings or like make you upset, but like when you were bleeding for your country, like being somebody who comes from a culture, like a counterculture of this country that is like very marginalized, like how the fuck, like...
So first off, you need to understand why I went into the military, which was for the greediest reasons possible. Not only did I need a change of lifestyle at the point in time where I went in, like I couldn't be the guy living in a fucking ghetto ass house fighting part-time.
Mom, I love you, but this trailer's got to go.
Yeah. So I needed a change of pace, and I went to college during September 11th, and I remember not leaving to go sign up immediately after the Twin Towers got hit, being a New Yorker.
Yeah.
So I told myself, you know, I was old enough to remember when like my uncles and people that were in my family went to Desert Shield and Desert Storm in the early 90s, and how quickly that was over. So I didn't want to just drop out of college for something that might have been over in a day. How was I supposed to know that the war on terror would be the longest war of our entire country's existence? There's no way to know. So now it's 2008, I sign up.
Yeah.
So it seemed like I showed up late to the party, but at that point in my
Because it
life,
was so close to home.
it was close to home. I had this idea that I would go over there using my, and I don't want to say hood experience, but my experience with dealing with adversity and being able to have a calm, cool, collected demeanor on a more experienced person's frame and help out 18-year-old whoever who doesn't have that experience.
You experienced like third world country in America.
Correct.
That's where you come from.
Correct. Which was a boon for all of those 18-year-old kids who did it because they just didn't know what to do with their lives.
Yeah.
So I did it for greedy reasons. It helped me get to a different point in my life when I didn't necessarily know what the next
I
step
don't think
was.
it had a greedy effect though.
It did.
You did it because you...
No. It was greedy in the sense that it got me out of a situation that I had no other way out of at that point in time. And it gave me some other skills, but allowed me to use skills that I developed growing up, a broke kid in a bad circumstance,
If the
and
greediness
apply
is,
it.
Look, do you feel guilt?
I do.
If the greediness is offset by the effect that it has in terms of like benevolence and giving and protecting and caring and compassion, all the things that like were in your heart. Like, yes, I understand that here's the thing about altruism. Altruism is greedy. There is no fucking form of altruism where you're not feeling satisfied by the love that you're giving to people.
Yeah, and I can see that to a degree, but I also see that my goal was to support people that might not have had any other choice, and at least giving them the ability to lean on my experience, even though they don't have it.
Yeah.
So now I'm in this situation. It's fucked up. We got this guy who's bleeding, and we're trying to help him. And I don't know why he signed up, but he definitely doesn't deserve to die there.
Yeah.
So we're getting him out. Meanwhile, the bird is inbound, and we know that they're going to drop a hoist, but now they can't. Because can they sit in the air and drop this thing and lower it and pick them up while we're being shot at? No, because now they're going to be a target. So now they have to fly a football field and a half away to find what's called defilade, which is a sinking of the land where they can't be shot at.
Like
and now,
and you gotta fucking carry the guy there.
And we have to carry him. So now, not only are we carrying him to this zone, but we're still being shot at. So now 4 of us pick this guy up, and we have to run him into the enemy fire to this bird.
How did you not get shot?
Luck. It's all luck. It's the fact that the Afghan people who are fighting us have an absurd amount of trust in their weapon, but don't know how to use it properly.
They don't have the training.
They think that because of their faith that the bullets will hit us, not necessarily because they are trained marksmen.
That's how Americans deal with climate change. Technology. We'll fix it. We got technology.
So unfortunately for them, they're not hitting the target. And fortunately for us, we're very lucky. So we get him to the bird. He takes off. He leaves. Now we have to go back into the compound and run back with our backs to the enemy while they're still firing at us. And now that the bird, like when the bird was down, the props are going and it's kicking up all this dirt. So it's called a brownout. It's just, you can't see shit. It's like brown fog.
Brown out all the time.
Yeah. It's like brown fog. So when you're running to it, you're running towards a sound, but you can't see shit. So we're like stumbling a little bit, but we're keeping the guy from falling, and we get there. And then the second you're under the props, it all clears. And now this dirt that's in your eyes goes away, and you can see like you're passing them off. And then they pick up and take off. And now when we turn back, there's nothing kicking up dirt. And as we're running back, you can see like plinks of where the bullets are hitting all nearby as dirt is jumping up. And they're not far off from target. We all make it back without getting shot. And now we start returning fire back to them.
Reminds me of like, I think it was like G.I. Jane or something.
Of course. Yeah.
I'm sorry, dude.
No, it's good. So now we start returning fire and we're fucking them up. We call in for rocket strikes and we mess these guys up. But we're still in the thick of it for the next 9.5 days. And that was 2 hours after getting there. And so having gone through something like that, it's very easy for me to step on the mats and just be like, cool, this is easy. I don't have to save somebody's life, and I don't have to take a life.
But how the fuck do you set that down?
It's so easy.
How do you set down those memories? Like,
because you don't want to think about it.
dude,
And because
look,
you don't want to
I've never been to war. I have nightmares every fucking night.
And I still do too. Like I was telling...
How the fuck do you
Listen, I had a nightmare last night. I was telling Jeff Shaw, like, and this is going to sound fucked up, but I had a dream like I caught this weird skin infection and I just had flesh melting off my bones. It's like, we can't control our subconscious.
I had that
but
one
we
time
have
I had a mushroom trip where that happened.
But we have to remember that our subconscious shows us our deepest, darkest fears. And as long as we recognize that it's out of our control and it's only a thought, we don't give it power. When we start giving it power, that's when people start doing really dumb shit, like cutting themselves or potentially like trying to kill themselves. And you have to remember, we are stronger than that.
Dude, we can't minimize, like, that is real, and that happens all the fucking
It does.
My father killed himself, dude.
We have to remember that. And like, here's what's fucked up. I have lost 9 people to war, and I have lost 35 people to suicide since then. How come more Marines are killing themselves out of combat than the enemy is killing in
Which
combat?
is why which is one of the reasons, one of the things that I was trying to fucking get to, and I'm bad about derailing. I derailed you off of lots
That's
of things
cool,
I'm
man.
trying to say.
That's fine.
But I also like derailed myself because I was trying to say that, like, the relatable thing, what I was talking about, how I just see you. I see who you are. Like, I feel like I can relate to you really well. And part of that is like how fucking resilient you are. And the other part of it is that, like, when you set down your luggage, it doesn't go away.
Listen, it doesn't go away. You're going to come back and collect it.
What if you forget and then it fucking comes back to you?
But here's the best part. It's one of those things where you can't ever forget it. It could be a while before you remind yourself that you have that shit, but you'll eventually still come back to it. And then, just like with your actual luggage, if you went on a trip and you come back and you don't immediately unpack it, it's still going to sit there. Eventually you will unpack it. Sometimes it takes us longer to unpack it than other times. And some of us travel a lot, and so we live out of our baggage. To use that analogy or metaphor and keep going with it, when you finally get to home base, that is your time to sort your fucking shit out. And too many times
I'm sorry, dude, but that's why I've been drunk for like way too long.
Okay, but that's okay. Guess
that's
what?
That's the chapter I was telling you about, and yes, I have nagging injuries that keep me out of the gym.
But Benji, understand this.
Oh, fuck.
Understand this. Are you home?
I don't know. What is home?
Okay, well, I mean, you could say wherever you set your head down at night can be home, or temporary, or you can say the place where you have your memories stored, right? But whatever your home happens to be should also be your sanctuary for unpacking your luggage.
I'm fucked up, dude. I'm fucked up. I've lived in 57 homes. I have a really hard time setting my luggage down anywhere.
That's good then. You know, you can say that home is wherever you want it to be. Like for me, right now, Bellingham.
Home is where the heart is, and I have a lot
all that shit. You can use a cliche.
No, but the truth is, like, home is where the heart is, and I carry my fucking heart everywhere I go, and I put it into everything I do.
Okay, cool, but you can also take it out of certain things and be greedy with it. And like for me, where I was able to unpack a lot of my baggage wasn't actually in therapy. It was like with Jeff and Betsy.
Dude, they're such fucking beautiful, wonderful people, dude.
Yeah, and they are. And this is why I think it's fortunate for me to be here right now, because
I'm really fucking glad you're here too.
Oh, I appreciate that. And the reason why I love those guys so much is because they're not judging me for any of my actions. What they're trying to be is supportive of my next set of actions. And so it's less about my past and more about my future. And when you can start to have goals, things of your past have less relevance. They will fuel you and put you on the trajectory for the things you want without getting in your way as roadblocks. Now, let me take this second to explain. Let me explain this real quick. Okay. There are speed bumps and there are roadblocks along the journey on the way of life. Mm-hmm. Speed bumps slow you down, roadblocks detour you. But you should never just park your car and settle, because we all have a limited gas tank. So when you think about life expectancy, some people think like well, I'm going through a midlife crisis. And all that goes into my mind is, wow, that's really funny that you think you're halfway through life. Because when I think about like halfway through life for me, I plan on being like over 100 years old. So when somebody is like 30 or 40 and they're having a midlife crisis, I'm like, you think you're living to 60 or 70 or 80? It's like, man, you're way too young for a midlife crisis. You've basically already told yourself your clock ends here.
Yeah.
Because my goals are so much further out, I have such a longer time ahead of me to prepare for certain things. And when people shortchange themselves, you can see that there's that glass half full analogy. Mm-hmm. I stopped thinking like that so long ago because I remind myself once again, the purpose of a glass is it's refillable. Mm-hmm. At different times in your life, you're going to exhaust that. You have to remind yourself that it's not all bad. Like, I'm still not getting beaten by my mom's boyfriends. I'm still not getting beaten by my way home from school. I'm not getting jumped for fucking money in New York. I'm not in a situation where like my life is in danger. When I'm going to the gym to train people, it's specifically like my intent to do this stuff and I'm in control.
I have to pee so bad I can taste it.
Okay, so go.
Okay.
We'll take a break.
All right. Sorry, I'm so sorry, dude. So we're gonna definitely do multiple episodes because me and Dave have a lot to talk about, and we've only touched on like a tiny little fucking smidgen of a tootle of all the things that need to be spoken about.
It's the iceberg effect. You only see 10%, right?
Right.
So just understanding, like, when I go back to that idea that the gas tank is finite, the road is only so long, and you're gonna have speed bumps and roadblocks, right? Sometimes you have to remind yourself of what can be fuel. Some people think it's like, oh no, you got to be like fucking Tinkerbell and have happy thoughts. I'm the exact opposite. I'm like, fuck that. Good times make for soft men.
Have you heard of, dude, okay, look. Me and you are both soft men. Let's not pretend we're not.
Listen, there's a difference between moisturizing and then being soft. When I think of soft, I think of people that can't miss a meal, need 8 hours or more of sleep, and need to have like, you know, gratuitous amounts of showers. And it's like, I am the exact opposite. I can live in the fucking dirt with squalor and make the most out of like dumpster diving.
I can too, but my heart still hurts.
What fuels me is not failing. And when I think of failure for me is different than most other human beings. Somebody would think like, if you don't make $55,000 minimum a year, or you don't have like...
Did your dad love you?
Huh?
Did your dad love you?
My stepdad did. My biological father's a piece of shit who I haven't seen in my entire living memory. Mm-hmm. I have no living memory of my biological father, and he is still alive to this day.
Did you have a good relationship with your mom?
No. And so a lot of my family drama fuels me.
I'm not asking you to be a dick, dude. I fucking actually care.
No, I'm glad that you want to know, but understand that also fuels me.
Yeah.
Because I, although will more than likely never have children, and that's a personal choice.
Like, if you did, dude, it would change the way you relate to yourself, because you talk about not being able to deal with failure and shit, but like, if your kids fail, you learn to love them. I didn't have to learn to do that.
Sure.
Like, I just love my kids regardless.
Sure.
And if they fail, I want them to see that as like a step in the right direction.
That is great parenting, but that is also a burden.
But you understand. Have you learned how to do that for yourself?
Understand this. My philosophy behind the choice for not having kids is less greedy than it might initially sound.
It's not like I did it on purpose either.
Well, more importantly, like I said, this is my thing, right? And we're all different, and we all come from a set of circumstances that change us for the better or for the worse. And I don't deny that if I had children, it wouldn't be this all-intensive change in direction for me. But because of the fact that I see how the climate is in the world at large, I'm not just talking about the political landscape of America. I'm saying in the world as a whole, with all the factors involved, I can't, under good, conscience, bring another life into this world intelligently and say, yep, I brought you in here so you could thrive.
Yeah.
It is such a shitty world right now that if I did that just for the sake of taking my genetic material and passing it on to another generation.
It's like when your parents are like, I gave you life, I brought you into this world. It's like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Seriously?
So here's where I stand. Do I want to have kids one day? No. Would that potentially change? Maybe. And if it did, do I want to be the genetic source material when there are tons of kids that are left all the time in foster care and adoption homes and all that shit? Fuck. I was one of those kids who would have loved to have been in a different family who could have supported them. So for me, I
really fucking appreciate you, dude.
Yeah, no sweat. But when I was
whatever, you're blowing it off.
I'm just saying, like,
but you're fucking
when I was 15 and homeless, I would have loved if someone would have found me and took me in who could have actually gave a shit, as opposed to, you know, basically being left for dead by drug abusing people who only cared about themselves. Mm-hmm. I right now care a lot about myself, but it's weird to think of this source material that doesn't even exist. It is abstract. It doesn't have any form, but the potential of a child in my care is such an important aspect of my destroyed childhood.
You would be such a fucking good dad.
But whether that's the case or not, I think it has to do with that child. Like, I couldn't in good conscience bring somebody into this world that I am not a fan of, and then somehow, you know, try to change that corruption for them in spite of the overwhelming influence around me. So if I did, it would have to be a different scenario where I save somebody from a already worse position than not having me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So as opposed to just bringing someone in a vacuum and being like, cool, hope you do well, I'll do my best. I know someone who has given up is at the bottom. So I would be better than that. That would be where I see myself. But more importantly, what I want is for my influence to be affected on the people that already exist, which is why I pour my heart and soul into what I teach on the mat, because I feel like even if you never use it, it's the gun and condom rule.
Also, you got to know, dude, like one of the reasons I have you on this podcast is because I look at you as somebody who, like, because I know what it means to be a coach, and like, I look at you as somebody who, you're not just teaching people jiu-jitsu. And also, like, you have a...
If they're listening.
Dude, my friend Landon on episode 27 fucking made this statement about resilience, about how resilience is a special club. And he's not, like, dissing on people who aren't resilient, but he's saying that, like, if we haven't been through what he's been through, he's not going to we're never going to understand him. And, like, I find you in a crowd of people, and I'm like, this guy is fucking real.
But... just to finish that last thought, which is that
Sorry,
for me,
derail.
No, it's cool. I just want to make sure that people understand, like, this is the heart and soul of my message, which is even if you never have to use it, it's still the gun and condom rule. I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And for me,
gun and condom.
yeah. And if people learn this skill and it someday finds its way into helping them out of a bad situation, then for me, the idea of proliferation, which is spreading the art, has happened in the best possible sense. I don't care if you never compete, never win a medal, never have the notoriety of being a good practitioner. The human, so I've cared about maybe 3 things in my whole life more than myself. And I have no problem saying one of them was my dog Baby, who I had growing up, who I love that creature more than any other living creature at that point in my life. And I could like bawl into tears right now if I think about it too hard. And then one of them I'll keep to myself, and the other one is my little protege back home in Virginia, who I have never cared about a human the same way I care about this young girl. And it's because, for no other particular reason, but I cannot think of a time in my life where I saw somebody who could have used this art form more than this one person. Because let's be real, I don't care what color your skin is. If you happen to be female, you're going to be a victim. And I feel like that's the case among all creeds and all colors. Women as a whole get targeted.
Christ, man! Like,
but think about it.
No,
I don't
you're
care.
right.
Yeah.
But like,
now let me talk.
You're so right.
But let me talk about Dewan Owens for a minute.
Okay.
What Dewan does with the Lionheart Initiative is when he goes to Senegal and he teaches these Senegalese women and children how to protect themselves, it's because they're the victims.
I kind of want to go there too and do that with him.
Talk to him when he comes out in 2 weeks. But more importantly, and I'm just going to wrap this up with this. I don't care if you're Chinese, Japanese, any kind of Asian, any kind of African, any kind of European, South American, North American, wherever you live, if you are in a civilized part of the world or an uncivilized part of the world, and you happen to be female, you're going to be targeted. And although if you're a black male living in Chicago, your life expectancy is much lower than a white male, it's still going to be low if you're a woman, and you're still going to be targeted by other men regardless of those colors. So for me, if I can find a woman and I can give her this art of jiu-jitsu and save them one day in a situation where someone is going to make physical bodily contact, a woman is less likely going to have to stand up, square off, like blade their body and throw a strike, as they are going to have to stop somebody from mounting them or getting on top of them and holding them down or choking them. Yeah. So for me, when I made the change from being a professional fighter and competitor into being an instructor, my goal was to make sure that any woman who is ever in my charge will never eventually become a statistic. And that to me is more important than eventually having kids or a life of my own. Because coming from child abuse and coming from a life of watching domestic violence and stuff like that, it is more important to me that my impact on the world is felt in others' lives than just having this individual gift that, not that I don't deserve it or that I wouldn't cherish it.
And that's what you mean by the difference between competitor Dave and instructor Dave.
Yes. And for me to proliferate the art in that sense is like having a child, is like having a valuable relationship. And it's more important because of my baggage and because I get to use that as fuel to feed into this other thing. So like I said, I have this human being back out east who I value her over most other things in my life because she will more than likely be the target of something, more than I would. And I want her in that moment to have this ability. And because of that, I have poured all of my heart and soul into her training. And to this day, I have no doubt in my mind that she can defend herself. And because of that, it has given me the ability to sleep better and more often than before she came into my life. So indirectly, she was the best therapy for me.
I fucking love this guy. A lot.
Well, you know, when I think about my reason for being on this planet, I know that some people will bend, some will break. But what we do with that damaged product will ultimately define us. Mm-hmm. So if we allow ourselves to bend, it's not bad. If we allow ourselves to break, it's not bad. It's what we do afterwards, right? How do we repair and move on?
Because broken doesn't necessarily mean broken forever.
Correct. And what I love about Asian cultures is that if a cup that's made of ceramic material breaks, rather than putting it in the dustbin and throwing it away, they will fuse it back together with gold, a more precious substance, to remake it. And that has more value than the original. And when I think about myself and my fractured soul from the shit I've been through and the combat overseas and the domestic violence and all the other crap, and I think about, I have fused myself with gold. I have taken little aspects of my life and improved them after breaking, and now I can be the person I am today. As opposed to letting this shit decide where I go and just throwing it all away. Which would be like if I were to say fuck it when I hit my darkest moment and done something terrible. That is a very permanent solution to a temporary problem. You can fix it, is my point. And what I'm trying to do now is show that through my deeds and my words to others, so that I can hopefully be that guiding light to them to say, it's not over. You can come from the worst possible scenario and go through some absolute shit and still be a good person, and showcase that to others so that they don't have to worry about being bent or broken, and they'll still be okay. But to be able to spread that is more meaningful to me than living in isolation, having my own family, and doing my own individual shit. I would much rather be an open book that anybody can ask a question to and share this stuff with. And it doesn't hurt me to talk about the bad stuff I've been through, because like I said, it's just the past. It's not my future.
Got so much fucking heart, dude.
And my future has so much more in store. And that's where I think the best thing is going to come from. Black belt to me was never the end of the road. It was always, who's going to be my first black belt?
Well, I come from like super traditional Chinese martial arts where a black belt doesn't, like, there is actually no belt system traditionally in Chinese martial arts. And one of the first things I ever learned from my Sifu when I went the Chinese way, because like I started out, anyway, I have a whole fucking journey of martial arts, but when I got to Chinese, it was like, I learned that black belt doesn't, and this makes perfect sense, black belt doesn't mean you are a master. Black belt means you've learned the basics. It means that you finally learned all the things in the system, and what you do from here on out is like master them. And mastery is not a fucking, it's not a thing you get to, it's a thing that you do. Mastery is a verb.
And this will be the absolute last thing, which is, when you get to black belt, you now know how to be the best student. So now for me, I know how to be the best student. I know how to listen. I know how to interpret the material coming to me, and then I know how to perform it and excel at the digesting of that material and then turning it into what it's supposed to be. And I can hopefully, as a person who represents what it means to be the best student, share that with students that are on the up and up. And that is my goal. So
you're doing that with me right now.
Yeah, man. And it's cool. And I'm glad to be on the podcast, and I think that we'll do another one of these.
I feel like I need to pay you. Like, this has been such a fucking amazing episode.
Listen,
dude.
I'm just glad you can glean some information from my experiences. But let's do this again. And now that we have a chunk of the backstory, let's start talking more about what the rest of the story is going to be.
Yeah, dude. Fuck yeah.
Cool. Thank you for having me on, man.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'll catch you later. Fuck yeah.
Cool. Thank you.